Welcome to Spectral Shadows, where the darkness whispers and the unseen lurks. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Because horror feels different at night, especially when you're alone. Those who love their mother, like, share, and comment. Subscribe, if you dare. Now turn off the lights, and let's begin. Story number 1. 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with end-stage liver failure. When I was younger, I drank more alcohol than water. I learned that selfishness hurt me more than anyone else ever could. Over time, I slowed down, not because I wanted to, but because partying in your 30s with college kids, as Freddie put it, just isn't a good look. The yacht parties my dad kept throwing didn't help either. Honestly, I wish I had a gambling addiction instead. At least then there was a chance of winning something. All I got was loss of time, health, and any humanity I thought I had left. My liver was so damaged that there was no chance it could heal on its own. Apparently my eyes were so yellow it looked like I used pee as eye drops, as Freddie joked. I was losing weight rapidly, too. I was immensely relieved when I found out my dad had signed me up for HemaCare's Life Vault package. When I was a toddler, all they needed was a blood sample. It's supposedly far superior to other organ printing hospitals, but also significantly more expensive. I guess second chances are only for those who can afford them. My doctor explained that while traditional transplants always carry a risk of rejection, HemaCare's printed organs supposedly have a 100% success rate. They also promise the healthiest possible version of each organ. I called in for a transplant and was scheduled immediately. When I arrived, a few weeks later, the facility felt more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. Aside from the ever-present, sterile smell in the stagnant air, the waiting room was quiet and cozy. I waited only a few minutes before a young Asian girl entered. She had short black hair and wore high-end designer clothing. She dropped into the chair like she was visiting a friend's house. She kept rubbing her left eye, which was covered by a surgical eye patch. I kept some distance between us in case whatever she had was contagious. Eventually a nurse approached me. "Hello, welcome to HemaCare. May I have your name?" "Adam Jones." Of course, this is an alias. Given the nature of this event, sharing my real name would be unwise. "All right, Mr. Jones. You're on the Life Vault plan. Please follow me so we can get you changed into your hospital gown." The click of her heels echoed through the empty hall with each step. With the awkward silence, I couldn't help but admire the polished dark wood floor and the walls painted a warm tan. The sterile scent only grew stronger as we walked. The nurse led me to a small changing room. I swapped my expensive, rumpled suit I'd slept in for a few days for a surprisingly soft gown. The gown didn't come with slippers, leaving my bare feet to press against the cold floor. Each step felt like walking on ice. When I looked into the mirror, it was hard to recognize myself. My eyes were piss yellow, my face and stomach thin. My hair that I'd kept clean and short was greasy and disheveled. I hardly had the energy to get out of bed most days, forget showering and shaving. I was hopeful that this surgery would give me the motivation I needed to get my life back. "Would you like us to have this cleaned for you?" She held it out with both hands, as if the suit was radioactive. "Sure," I said. I couldn't blame her. It was filthy, and I'd been too exhausted to change. Of course, please follow me to your room. She sealed the suit in a clear garment, bag, and led the way. Halfway down the hall, we were stopped at an intersection by two male nurses pulling a cart, carrying a large red container about the size of a coffin. The shorter of the two men paused for a moment to look at his clipboard. As he scanned the page, a soft thud came from the container. He looked fearfully at the other nurse, who swiftly grabbed the handle of the cart and pulled it down the hallway, walking as fast as he could without running. The shorter nurse scrambled to follow him, throwing a nervous glance at me. I gazed down the hall they had come from and noticed a door labeled Spare Room. It was the only one with a badge scanner. I could see a red light glowing from under the door. Curiosity tugged at me. "What's in there?" I asked. The nurse looked briefly toward the door, clearly shaken by what just transpired. "Oh," she laughed nervously. "That's just the spare room. We store emergency equipment and replacement supplies there. Now please follow me. We've almost reached your room." As we walked, I couldn't stop thinking about that room. I glanced back. The red light was gone, but my interest wasn't. When we reached my room, I noticed it had the same ID scanner as the spare room door from earlier. The nurse swiped the card hanging from her neck, and the door clicked open. When I entered the room, I was genuinely surprised. I've stayed in hotel rooms far less luxurious than this. The bed was all white, the room dimly lit and stylishly modern. Gray leather couches, a dark marble coffee table, a door to my own restroom, a huge flat-screen TV, and even a sleek mini fridge humming quietly in the corner. This is where you'll stay while you're being treated. The duration depends on how your body responds. You're free to leave the building, but we strongly recommend you don't, especially before and after the surgery. Please make yourself at home. I'll go call your surgeon. Naturally, I checked the fridge first. It was stocked with soft foods, applesauce, pudding, protein shakes, and an assortment of jelly. I took a cherry jelly cup and a plastic spoon, sat on the couch, and took my first bite of real food in days. You know you're at rock bottom when jelly is the most nutritious thing you've eaten in a week. The translucent jelly glowed an unnatural red under the warmth of the overhead light. It brought back the memory of the light seeping from beneath the spare room door. I decided to go take a look around the hospital, but when I made my way over to the door and turned the handle, it didn't budge. It was locked. A short while later, a man in a white coat knocked and entered, leaving the door open. "Good evening, Mr. Jones. I'm Dr. Matthew Ross, and I'll be performing your surgery. But first, I need to explain your situation. Your body shows clear signs of decompensated cirrhosis, but luckily there's still plenty of time to prepare. Your new liver will be ready soon. Until then, please do not eat anything for the next 8 hours to avoid complications. Your surgery is scheduled for 10 p.m. Also, please don't leave the room. We'll need to be able to reach you in case of an emergency. Do you have any questions?" "Yes. Why is my door locked?" Dr. Ross pulled a key card from his coat pocket. "This is my access card. It gives staff access to any door within their clearance level. We keep certain doors locked to prevent patients from wandering while undergoing treatment. Surgery can be stressful, and sometimes patients get disoriented, and start walking around. Our building is huge, full of winding halls and identical rooms. If someone has a medical emergency and they're not in the right room, we might not be able to reach them in time. Of course, you're free to use the restroom that is attached to your room, and you can leave the facility at any time. Just let us know so someone can escort you safely. Any other questions? Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I do have another one. Where exactly does the liver come from? And why is it supposed to be better than the organs from other hospitals? I didn't actually care for the answers. I just needed a distraction. The liver is actually grown from your own blood. When you were a child, your parents enrolled you in our plan. Unlike most hospitals that freeze blood and grow organs only when needed in a womb-like environment, we grow all vital organs immediately after receiving the sample. Maintaining them is extremely expensive, but there are benefits. Your body accepts the organ as if it's always been there. What do you mean by accepting? Does the body try to refuse organs? I asked, while slowly walking over to the empty jelly cup. The doctor paused. Yes, traditional organ transplant rejections are fairly common. The immune system doesn't recognize the organ and attacks it. Ours don't have that risk, which is what sets us apart from other organ printing companies. But if they can freeze blood, why don't you guys just freeze organs too? That way you can thaw them when needed. I took the jelly cup's aluminum seal off the table. The surgeon smiled and said, "That is a great idea. Blood cells frozen for many years could lead to DNA damage, so other companies run that risk. To reduce this risk, they split the blood into multiple vials, since it doesn't take much blood to start the organ-growing process. However, organs are much larger and a lot more complex. Freezing and thawing will almost always result in the organ being damaged severely. Preserving it in a false body apparatus keeps the organ growing and healthy without the need of freezing." I was still a bit confused, but I think I got the gist. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. One last thing, if you don't mind. While I was in the bathroom, the faucet wasn't working. Could you please take a look at it? The doctor hesitated. Sure, but I'm not exactly handy. If there's a problem, I'll call for assistance." He set his clipboard on the table and walked into the restroom. The moment he left my view, I moved quickly and quietly to the door, stuffing the aluminum cover into the slot where the door lock would go into. It seems to be working fine. I quickly went back to where I was standing, Dr. Ross's voice becoming louder as he left the bathroom. "If you have any more issues with the faucet, just press on the remote near your bedside, and a nurse will be with you right away. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your help, Dr. Ross." I tried for a polite smile, but it came off as condescending. His own smile faltered a bit. "You're very welcome. I'm glad I could help. I'll get everything ready for the procedure. Please, enjoy your stay." He left, and I was alone again. Bored of endless scrolling through streaming services, I sat in silence, waiting for the coast to clear. Eventually, I decided it was safe to leave. I had to know what the source of that red light was, and what made that noise from inside the container. I got up and turned the door handle slowly, careful to not make noise. The hallways were just as empty as before, but without the nurse's rhythmic steps. I wandered through the repeating hallways. The only indication that I wasn't going in circles were the room number signs. While I was walking around trying to find the red room, a nurse walking backwards with an empty cart bumped into me. They were the nurses from before. I instantly noticed his ID card clipped onto his pants pocket. I could barely make out the name Reginald. Oh, I'm so sorry. He paused, his eyes fixed on my face, like he couldn't quite understand what he was seeing. It felt like he was scanning every inch of me. The taller nurse gave him a sharp nudge with the cart and let out a cough. The short nurse blinked in succession, then forced a smile. "I'm so sorry, sir. Please return to your room and wait for your treatment. I know I'm not much to look at. I'm stricken with jaundice, skinny and sick, but you'd think a nurse would be used to it." The short nurse whispered something to the tall one, who nodded and took the cart, while the other walked off in the direction they'd come from. Curious, I followed him, keeping my distance. He kept glancing over his shoulder, failing at being inconspicuous. He picked up his pace. After a final turn, he reached the spare room, pulled out a key card, scanned it, then entered a code into the keypad. He slipped inside. Going in with him would be risky, so I thought if I hid and waited, I could try to steal his badge discreetly. So I hid behind a corner, watching the door and waiting. Only a few moments later, the red light returned, and immediately after the nurse walked out, sighing, a breath of relief, but quickly looked up. A jolt of panic hit me. Had he seen me? I desperately looked for a hiding place, so I crouched behind a large plant in an alcove. I was surprised that I was small enough to fit. His footsteps were quick. They drew closer, growing louder until they suddenly slowed. I held my breath, praying he didn't notice me. His footsteps stopped entirely, but after a few moments he muttered, "Get it together, man." Then his footsteps continued, completely unaware that I was there. I knew that if I was found, they'd tighten up security. Then I'd have no chance of knowing what was in that room, and I'd be mortified that I'd been found crouching half naked behind a plant like a lunatic. After a minute of silence, I sprinted to the door. Miraculously, the nurse left his card in the scanner. I looked over my shoulder to make sure no one was around and reached for the door handle. But the closer my hand got to the metal handle, the colder the air around my fingers became. I hesitated for a moment, doubts crawling down my body like spiders, but curiosity pushed through, and I gently opened the door. The room was very dark and freezing. Each breath let out visible fog. It was mostly empty except for a blue-lit screen glowing softly on a podium in the center. Above me, rows upon rows of large glass chambers hung like meat hooks in a butcher shop. I approached the screen. It asked for a patient's name or ID. Entered my name. Result found. I selected my profile. Name: Adam Jones. Age: 35. Sex: male. More data, such as blood type, medical history, etc., were listed. On the right side of the screen was a large green button. Spare. I immediately pressed it. A second profile appeared. Spare: 737061725. Age: 33. Organs available, all green listed, except one. Liver: unavailable. I felt something churn deep inside. Then I saw another button. Retrieve in. Bright yellow. And I, of course, pressed it. The glass chambers overhead started moving on tracks, clanking and shifting until one hovered above the center platform. Beneath it, a circular platform lit up white. The chamber slowly descended, like a claw machine, lowering a fragile prize. When the glass chambers stopped, I looked closely into it. A pair of white eyes stared back at me. I froze. Terror became a dark, oozing liquid, clinging to me. The figure had long brown hair and wore a breathing mask with a tube covering most of his face. Wires coiled around his muscular frame, suspended in fluid, curled in a fetal position. Its gaze followed me no matter where I moved. Not alert, just instinctive. Infantile. Whoever this was, I had to help him. I pounded on the glass. Nothing. It was stronger than I expected. There had to be a way to open it. Hey, can you understand me? I asked the man desperately, but he stayed silent. I stared at him, hoping that he would show some sort of awareness. But the longer I looked, the more familiar he became. The hair color, the eyes, the face shape. I noticed 2 small moles on the man's curled hands. I quickly turned my wrist to look for my own 2 moles. For a moment I could not even fathom it. It was me. I jerked my head back to the terminal. The yellow button was now red. Drain and extract. Before I could press it, I heard voices approaching. I ducked into a shadowed corner. The 2 nurses stormed in, wheeling in the cart along with them, with the large red container from before. You idiot. How do you forget to pull your ID from the scanner? The tall one hissed. I know. But it was that guy's fault. He got into my head. When I left the room, I swear I thought I saw him again at the end of the hallway. So quickly, I ran to catch him, but no one was there. The 2 froze when their eyes locked onto the tank. You forgot to put back the spare. I did. I swear. There must have been a glitch or something. I couldn't tell if he was stuttering from the cold or from anxiety. The tall nurse crossed his arms and took a deep breath. You forgot your key card and blamed it on a hallucination. Then you didn't return the spare, and you expect me to believe there was a glitch? Ah. He finished, nearly shouting. Yeah, I know how this looks, but please don't tell Kay Carla. She'll kill me. I swear this won't happen again. He said, pleadingly. The tall one's anger dissipated, melting into sympathy. Fine. The system automatically tells her when spares are retrieved, but not by whom. I'll say I retrieved the spare 3 times. I'll make up a dumb reason. But you tell her about bumping into the patient and the key card. The short nurse nodded rapidly, eyes full of tears. The tall man pressed a button, returning the man in the chamber to its place. The tall man sighed. All right, which one is next? He said, his breath turning to fog in the freezing room. The shorter nurse wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and pulled out a clipboard from the cart. The short nurse cleared his throat. Tammy Warren. ID number is 6579650DOA, female. 24 severe eye damage. Another one? There have been so many eye replacements recently. Is there disease or something to worry about? The tall man spoke as he typed on the screen. It looks like one eye is already unavailable. Is the patient sick? The capsules moved again. No, I looked into it. Almost 90% of the eyes we remove from patients have the same strange residue on them. It's caused by this new hallucinogenic on the market, eye candy. Apparently, because new organs are more accessible than ever, people have started experimenting with it. It causes extremely vivid hallucinations, but almost always destroys the eyes. The worst part is the people who get a transplant after wrecking their vision almost always relapse. But unlike necessary organs, eyes don't need to be put into the spares to acclimate. He finished speaking when a new capsule lowered. It contained a young Asian girl, her hair black and shiny, swirling around her like a cocoon. The taller man shook his head. Those damn junkies. You'd think having a second chance would stop them from self-destruction. What if something happened to the meat fridges? Has the thought never crossed their minds? They're taking their organs for granted. He spat. After a few moments of silent scribbling on the clipboard, the taller nurse spoke again. "All right, get the cart ready. I'll drain and extract." He tapped on the screen again. This time the whole room lit up deep red, like a photographer's dark room. My stomach dropped. They'll see me. The chamber drained of liquid. The girl descended slowly until her frail, naked body met the floor. She laid there, motionless, as the chamber glass slid to the side, granting access to their meat fridge. The short nurse gave a button at the side of the cart a long press, lowering it until the top reached his ankle. "All right," he said. "Like usual, I'll get the hands, and you get the legs," the taller man ordered. The shorter man stretched his back and bent down to pick up the girl's legs and drop them. "Damn. Sorry. She's slippery." The taller man took a deep, steadying breath and patiently held onto her arms, used to his partner's incompetence. The shorter nurse grabbed a towel from the cart and wiped her legs dry. "Sorry," he muttered again. The two men slowly picked her up and placed her gently into the red container. There wasn't even the faintest trace of resistance in the girl. She was more corpse than human. Just looking at her turned my stomach. I had to get out of there, and fast. The tall man walked back over to the computer and pressed the screen again. "All right, which room?" "Room 411, the short nurse said, as the empty chamber ascended back into the rafters. The two nurses left, pulling the cart behind them. The silence in the room was palpable. I rushed over to the screen and pulled up my clone's profile one last time. My index finger quickly moved to the right side, but I hovered there, shaking above the retrieve button. They'd know it was retrieved a fourth time. Why risk it? What if I needed another organ like Tammy? Yeah, I know how bad that sounds. I mean, I could get another organ grown. But what if it's my heart, and they couldn't grow it fast enough? Or what if my body rejects it? I slowly looked up at the capsules, listening for even the slightest murmur for help. But the room was a silent graveyard. I could see faint eyes watching me from all around. A few had one eye, even fewer had both. These weren't real people, I told myself. They were storage. If I opened the capsules, they'd probably just collapse helplessly, too. I held my hand reluctantly over the X icon and closed my eyes and pressed down. Maybe someone else will help them. Walking out of that room, I'd convince myself I couldn't, that I wouldn't even know how. Now, 4 years later, I know that that was bullshit. I even knew it then, but I still walked away. I'm hoping that by writing this and telling the world, that someone will see this and do what I couldn't. I couldn't help then, and I can't help now. I can't go back. I can't face those lifeless eyes that I left behind. I still remember those eyes as I reach for another bottle. Story number 2. When I first saw the masked man, it was 10:37 p.m. on Tuesday, April 18th, 2002. I remember because my parents had allowed me to stay up an extra hour to watch my favorite TV show, Bedtime with Mr. Teddy. A few minutes after falling asleep, it became clear that this was not the dreamland I was accustomed to. There were no toys, or friends, or hugs from Mom. Instead, there was him. He always appeared from darkness, gliding on a wave of black, formless and faceless, as dream itself. The masked man neither smiled nor threatened, never shouted nor heralded his own presence. I never saw the back of the masked man, but what I did see of him revealed nothing about what sort of person he might be behind that mask. It was a long, thin facade, not unlike images I would later see of plague doctors in medieval Europe. But his was wider and lacked the queer bird-like appearance of those erstwhile medicine men. That is not to say that the mask was not queer. It shone black, and when I stared deeply into its rippling surface, I saw what looked like whole worlds disappearing into its unnatural depths. All at once, without any perceptible movement on the part of him, a tube appeared at his hand. In the inexplicable way that dreams reveal themselves to us, I knew that the tube should be feared. My skin erupted in cold sweat, and I tried to scream, but just as the blackness of his mask stole whatever light surrounded the man's face, it quieted all sound. I had been enveloped in the inky blackness and felt its frigid touch across my small, 5-year-old body. But nothing could have prepared me for the hell that came next. With no warning, the masked man flung his tube towards me and watched as it attached itself to my mouth. I attempted to pry it away, but the thing merely became stuck to my hands as well. And so, helplessly, I watched with widening eyes as the tube slowly curled into my mouth, down my throat, and into my lungs. I could do nothing but plead with silent, watering eyes, locked on to the masked man, as he stood, silent and inscrutable, and as the tube filled my lungs with the same inky blackness, until I felt that I would burst. All the while, a loud, hoarse, screeching noise erupted around the void, rising ever higher in volume and urgency. For minutes and minutes on end I gasped, or attempted to gasp, as the cold glue-like shadows crushed me from within. At the same time, my entire body began to weaken more and more, until the sensation was nearly as frightening as the all-consuming asphyxiation. After watching this brutal torture, for how long I could not have guessed, the masked man held up a scroll. It was empty, and I was confused by the gesture. As I watched, the masked man dragged a scorched claw across the top of his scroll to reveal, in glowing black letters, a single phrase. A command. Do not watch Bedtime with Mr. Teddy. I woke, heaving and covered in cold sweat. Naturally, I screamed for my parents, who rushed into the room and held me. They were quick to remind me that dreams can't hurt you, that they loved me, that the masked man wasn't real. As a child, you believe the things you're told. Because you're a child, your parents are all-knowing gods, and because you know nothing. So I believed that the masked man didn't exist. But even at 5 years old, I couldn't help but think that whether he existed or not was almost beside the point. The pain that he had inflicted was very real, and I would do anything not to feel it again. I thought about the scroll that the masked man had held, with its simple imperative, "Do not watch Bedtime with Mr. Teddy." Bedtime was my favorite show, and I definitely didn't want to give it up because of some silly dream. But the memory of the black tar, the drowning, and the pain made me hesitate. All of the next day I thought about the masked man. Even bringing him to mind made me start to shiver with aftershocks of the pain. My little 5-year-old body vibrated like it was hooked up to a live wire. Mrs. Grayson, my kindergarten teacher, asked me what was wrong, and I told her that I'd had a nightmare. She smiled at me, put a comforting hand on my shoulder, and said, "Not to worry." She taught me a song that would make any monsters leave me alone. Bad men go away, come again another day. Little Jamie wants to play, come again another day. In my young mind, I'd just been given a shield against the masked man. So that night I turned on Bedtime without a care in the world. Looking back on it, I don't remember much about the show itself. I just remember how comforting it felt to watch it, like being wrapped in a warm hug. It brings to mind that famous Maya Angelou quote, "People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." After the show was over, it was time for me to go to sleep. My parents surrounded me with my favorite toys, turned out the lights, and soon I was snoring peacefully under the covers. Almost immediately, the masked man returned. He glided into the frame of my mind's eye, trailing his cold, inky blackness. We locked eyes, and I pulled myself up to my full 4 feet of height and began singing Mrs. Grayson's song, "Bad men go away, come again another day. Little Jamie wants to play, come again another day." But the masked man had no reaction whatsoever to my voice. Instead, he glided closer and closer until my words began to disappear into the shining blackness of his mask. He stood there with his head pointed vaguely in my direction, spreading dark tendrils across my body, until suddenly his arm shot out towards me, and that same all-consuming hoarse screech came from everywhere and nowhere. The tubes of black curled through my mouth and nose and down, down, down into my lungs. That unbearable pressure began to build, and the suffocation started to squeeze, and my eyes started to bulge. And through it all, an irresistible panic rose from my chest, until it was all I could feel. Along with the panic came that same overwhelming weakness which drained every drop of strength from my petrified muscles. Soon I was incapable of motion without Herculean effort. Pointing at the masked man became unthinkable. As unthinkable as running an Olympic marathon. But with tremendous pain and determination, I was able to move the muscles in my eyes until my pupils pointed in his direction, silently pleading with him to end my suffering. Or, if not that, at least my life. Instead, he stared back with that cold, inscrutable visage and held up his scroll, tapping on the first line, which still read, "Do not watch Bear Time with Mr. Teddy." Eventually, I woke from this hell and screamed for my parents once again. They held me, rocked me, and whispered soothing words into my ears. But I was beyond inconsolable. There could no longer be any doubt. The masked man was real. Even through cold sweat and tears, my traumatized 5-year-old mind was beginning to come to terms with my new reality. I lived at the pleasure of the masked man. From then on, I refused to watch Bear Time. My parents tried to put it on the next night to get me to sleep, but I screamed and hid my face under the blankets, shaking uncontrollably and shouting to the masked man that I wouldn't watch, that I hadn't watched it, that I was being a good boy. They turned it off and exchanged glances which looked almost as terrified as I felt. As a child, the idea that your parents could be as afraid as you does not enter your mind. They aren't people like you. They're the ones who are supposed to know. But nobody really understood the masked man. For a while, I managed to avoid him. I'd even begun to convince myself that he was just a nightmare. But then, one night, he came again, gliding on his wave of black. As the terror and the pain surrounded me, a new sensation spread across my mind. Indignation. I'd followed the rule, hadn't I? It had been weeks since I'd watched Bear Time. Not even a glimpse of it on the screen. Of course, I was unable to plead my case to the masked man, and could only stand there suffering silent agony. This time, however, when he held up the scroll, his dark claw dragged across the second line and revealed another command. Do not take an even number of steps on any given day. Eyes opened, the bedroom dark, screaming, parents rushing in. Still, even after I had suffered through the pain several times, it was overwhelming. It isn't true what they say, that time heals all wounds. Some of them just fester and poison your blood. From then on, I counted each step that I took. Good. 2, bad. 3, good. Kids at school began to look at me funny. Then they stopped, wanting to play with me. I hardly noticed, so consumed was I with my counting. It was life, the counting. A single missed step, and the masked man would return. Not everyone avoided me. There was one boy named Alan, who was also special. Our parents thought it would be good for us to spend some time together, so they shipped me off to his house one weekend for a sleepover. It hadn't occurred to them to wonder whether we had anything in common besides our mutual isolation. As it turned out, we didn't. Alan was sitting in a corner stacking Legos when I came in. I asked Alan if he wanted to build something with me, but he just kept stacking and didn't even seem to realize that I was there. When I tapped him on the shoulder, he shoved me hard onto the ground. I yelled at him and shoved him back. His parents came in to separate us, and I was afraid that they'd be upset with me. But this was apparently not the first time that Alan had had an issue with shoving. They told him, very sternly, not to do it again, and left the room. Alan reluctantly agreed to let me add blocks to his tower, but only if I put them where he wanted them to go. As I busied myself finding the very particular pieces that he described to me. Get the yellow one, with 2 dots sideways and 3 dots up and down. A terrifying thought occurred to me. Did Alan's shove count as a step? I hadn't taken it myself, but I had moved. Before that, the count was 2,137. Was I at 2,238 now? Should I take another? Alan interrupted my thoughts by yelling at me for putting the yellow block on the wrong side of the tower. I moved it quietly and went back to trying to work it out. It wasn't as if I could ask the masked man for clarification. He only showed up in my dreams, and then only to torture me. That night, after Alan's parents had put us to bed, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Maybe if I didn't fall asleep, the masked man couldn't hurt me. The count would reset tomorrow, after all. But then wouldn't he just punish me when I did fall asleep? I figured that it was worth a try, and that at the very least I could spare myself the pain for this one night. So, I kept myself awake all through the night, which to a 6-year-old, my birthday had just recently come and gone, felt like years. In the morning, I started the count again, but couldn't help but be distracted by this legalistic minefield I had entered. All I could think about, every time my mind wandered, was the last time the masked man had come. How much it had hurt, and how desperate I was to avoid it happening again. So I stayed awake that night, too, and the night after that, and the night after that. But there's only so long that you can keep your eyes open before your brain will make you sleep. Later, as an adult, I read extensively about the science of sleep to determine if there was any way to remove the need for it altogether. As it happened, there was an odd case of an American man who was born without any need for sleep. He sat in his rocking chair and read a newspaper every night and got up refreshed in the morning. Another man, a soldier from Hungary, claimed to have lost the need for sleep after a gunshot to the head. Yet another man, a farmer from Thailand, claimed to have not needed sleep ever since a childhood fever. None of these cases was ever explained or conclusively verified. However, was not like these people. Sleep was an absolute necessity, and it claimed me whether I liked it or not. This time, however, the masked man did not come. Apparently, the shove from Alan had not counted. Of course, I had no way to know this as I was drifting off, and the last sensation that went through my mind before darkness claimed me was one of absolute terror. I woke shaking, but quickly realized that I'd managed to avoid the masked man. A feeling of all-consuming relief flooded my body, and I sobbed, not in fear, but out of the sheer happiness of avoiding torture. Then, I began to think about how sad it was that this fact brought me so much joy. This was a thought that would inhabit me throughout my life. The quiet, brutal dissonance between my life and the norm. Why was it that I, a seemingly good kid, with no sins I could think of, was condemned to this existence of endless calculation, just to avoid pain, when others ran and played outside in the sun without a care in the world? I glanced out the window at the rising sun and saw a boy and a girl, not much older than me, playing with a ball in the street. I thought about how if that were me, I would be counting each step and covering my eyes to avoid any nearby television screens. I thought about how unfair it all was, and began crying all over again, but this time for real. I turned my face to the ceiling, up to the sky, up to God, and whispered a tiny childlike prayer asking for an end to the pain, but there was only silence in return. Years later, I would read the work of French philosopher Albert Camus and come across his discussion of the absurdity of a world that places conscious beings into a position where they are faced with the unreasonable silence of the world. It occurred to me then, and occurs to me now, that this rather understates the matter. The world may be silent, but that silence rarely feels unreasonable. It felt, to that small, terrified 6-year-old boy, like an accusation of a terrible crime. And after many years, I began to believe that this was the case. The more I was hurt, the more I began to feel like I deserved the hurt and hated myself for it. What an awful person I must be, I thought to myself. Why else would I be in pain all the time? But this was before I learned the most terrible secret of existence. Justice is only the most cruel of the lies we tell ourselves to sleep peacefully at night. The free prize we were promised at the bottom of the cereal box of life, only to find cheap cardboard and the saccharine sweet face of some corporate mascot. At least I'd avoided the pain for one more day, or so I'd thought. The next night when I went to sleep, I saw the masked man and immediately tried to wake myself up. This was another tactic I explored through the years, but to no avail. I once paid a surgeon from the former Soviet Union to watch me while I slept and wake me at the first sign of a nightmare. He told me when I woke that he had tried everything he could think of. Drugs, deep brain stimulation, you name it. But nothing could interrupt the horrific penance demanded by the masked man. That night, however, I was just confused. I had been certain to count my steps and avoid television screens, and knew that I had followed the rules. Nevertheless, the same inky blackness curled into my lungs and had me gasping against its frigid tendrils. The same unbearable weakness drained my body of the last of its strength. As it happened, I assumed that this was a delayed reaction to my misstep with Alan. The masked man must have come just a day too late, but instead, he dragged his claw across the third line on the scroll to reveal another command. Always wear green on Thursdays. And so, from then on, I always wore green on Thursdays. It was clear then that the masked man intended to continue adding rules to his list. Even if I followed each one to the letter, there was always another ready to reveal itself and draw his wrath. As the months wore on, the masked man added more and more rules, each time taking his pound of flesh in my dreams. The number of rules was becoming difficult to manage, so I kept a list of them in a piece of paper in my breast pocket, by my heart. Later, I would keep it in my phone so I could check it whenever I needed. Even Alan stopped hanging out with me after that. The other kids ignored me for the most part, but some thought it was funny to mess up my count, or to steal one item or another of clothing that the masked man had ordered me to wear. Eventually, it became impossible for my parents to ignore my bizarre behavior, and they insisted that I talk to a shrink. At first, I thought that maybe he would be able to help, but after a month or two of breathing exercises and meditation, I realized that he was just as ill-prepared to deal with the masked man as my parents had been. I saw him once a week, mostly to appease them, but knew that he wouldn't stop the masked man from coming. Over the years, I withdrew more and more from the world. I made a friend here or there, but they would always quietly slip away when it became clear that I couldn't leave the house for more than a few minutes at a time. By then, I had become completely consumed by doing the masked man's bidding. I was always doing my counting. I was terrified to see a television screen or a red door handle. I was forbidden from constructing a sentence which contained 2 words, with 5 syllables each, and so on, and so on. But even with that constant vigilance, I was not good enough to stop his appearances entirely. He still came some nights, and each time the pain was worse than the last. Once in a while I found a girl willing to put up with these eccentricities, but they never stayed for long. I dropped out of college after attending classes became too great of a risk. My campus was in a wooded area, and I was forbidden from seeing more than 2 oak trees a day. Little by little, I stopped leaving the house altogether. I managed to find a remote job entering numbers into a table. I clicked here and there, moving the squiggles into the correct columns until they turned green. When I'd saved up enough money, I rented a cabin in the middle of nowhere, far from any possible reasons to trigger an appearance by the masked man. And this is where I've been for the last few years. My skin is bleached white from lack of exposure to the sun. My hands are so pale that if I hold them up to the window, they almost blend in with the clouds. Last night I peered at myself in the mirror and saw a gaunt, unperson staring back. Inside, I'm still that small, terrified child who first saw the masked man. But the man in the mirror looks far older than his 28 years. He is bent, wizened, and weak. His hair is prematurely thinning, and his hands shake with the very effort of life. He is tired of this existence. Even with this self-imposed imprisonment, the masked man still comes, still exacts his terrible price. And so he has decided that today is the last day. I watch as he reaches into the medicine cabinet to retrieve a revolver. He opens it, checks to make sure that the bullets are loaded, blows some dust off of the barrel, and closes it again. He places it against his forehead and smiles a little, skeletal smile. Finally, he will be free of the masked man. He has waited his entire life to say those words. He's always known that this was a way out, but he hasn't had the courage to do it until today. He presses his finger to the trigger, intending to pull it, when all of a sudden he's gripped by an all-consuming terror. His eyes roll back into his head and he falls to the floor. As his body shakes uncontrollably, his mind is in a very familiar void, all made of black. Formless and faceless, a masked man glides on a wave of darkness until he stands before the skeletal figure. The masked man raises him up and points to his scroll as the tendrils begin to wind their way into the figure's mouth. As the figure's eyes widen and he begins to gag with the familiar black agony, the masked man drags his claw across the scroll to reveal one final command. The last one on the list. The last one he will ever need. Do not die. Story number 3. I've been driving tow truck for Morrison's Auto Recovery for 8 years now. Started on day shifts, but the night work pays better, and there's less traffic to deal with. You get used to the weird hours, the drunk drivers who wrapped their cars around telephone poles, the breakdowns on dark stretches of highway where cell service cuts out. It's honest work, and I'm good at it. Most calls are routine. Dead battery, flat tire, fender bender where nobody got hurt. Once in a while you get something that sticks with you, like the time I pulled a sedan out of Miller's Creek with the driver still inside, or the guy who insisted his car had been moved while he was getting coffee at the truck stop. You learn to take people's stories with a grain of salt. Stress and fear make folks see things that aren't there. But last Tuesday's call was different. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened out there on Route 47. The dispatch came in around 2:30 a.m. Vehicle off the road, mile marker 22, possibly occupied. Linda's voice crackled through the radio. Caller said the driver might still be inside, but she couldn't get close enough to check. Mile marker 22 on Route 47 runs through some of the thickest forest in the county. It's a winding two-lane that connects the valley towns to the interstate, popular with truckers trying to avoid the way stations. During the day it's scenic enough, but at night it's just 20 miles of dark trees and no cell coverage. I grabbed my coffee and headed out. Linda had given me the coordinates, so I knew roughly where to look, but finding a car that's actually off the road can mean anything from pulled onto the shoulder to wrapped around a tree 50 yards into the woods. I kept my speed reasonable and watched for reflectors or broken glass. I found it about a quarter mile past the marker. At first glance, it looked like the driver had just pulled off to take a call or get some sleep. The car, a blue Honda Accord, maybe 5 years old, was parked about 30 feet into the tree line on a patch of relatively flat ground. The engine was off, but the headlights were still on, casting weak beams through the fog that had rolled. During the drive, I pulled my truck up parallel to the road and hit the flashers. Standard procedure is to assess the situation before you start hooking anything up, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked over to see what I was dealing with. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. The car's doors were all locked, windows rolled up tight, and I could see someone in the driver's seat. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, gripping the steering wheel like her life depended on it. When my flashlight beam hit the windshield, she looked up at me with eyes that were wide with terror, makeup running. I tapped on the driver's side window. "Ma'am, I'm with Morrison's Towing. Are you hurt?" She shook her head but didn't roll down the window. Instead, she pointed toward the woods behind her car and mouthed something I couldn't make out. "Ma'am, I need you to open the window so we can talk," I called, raising my voice slightly. This time she did roll it down, but just a crack. "You need to get that car out of here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right now. Don't unhook anything. Don't get out again. Just pull it back to the road." "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm not hurt." She glanced toward the trees again. "But there's something out there. Something big. It's been watching me for the past 2 hours. I'll admit my first thought was drugs or alcohol. Wouldn't be the first time someone got spooked by shadows while under the influence. But she didn't smell like booze, and her speech was clear and coherent. "What kind of something?" I asked, playing along. "I don't know. I never got a good look at it. But it's huge. Bigger than a person, and it's been circling the car, just staying back in the trees where I can't see it clearly. I played my flashlight beam into the woods behind her car. The fog made it hard to see more than 20 feet, but I didn't spot anything unusual. Just pine trees and underbrush, same as the rest of the forest along Route 47. Ma'am, I don't see anything back there. How about we get your car back on the road, and I'll follow you to the nearest gas station. You can call someone from there. No. Her voice was firm. Don't go back there. Just hook up the car and pull it out, please. Something in her tone made me pause. I've dealt with a lot of scared drivers over the years, and you learn to distinguish between different kinds of fear. Drunk fear is sloppy and unfocused. Accident fear is sharp, but fades once the immediate danger passes. This was something else. The kind of steady, controlled terror that comes from extended exposure to real danger. I decided to humor her. All right, ma'am, I'm gonna hook up the car from here and pull you back to the road. Keep your doors locked and stay inside. Walking back to my truck, I found myself listening more carefully to the sounds around me. The forest was quiet. Unusually quiet. No owl calls, no rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Just the low hum of my truck's engine and the distant sound of a semi passing on the interstate miles away. I was backing my truck into position when I noticed the smell. It was strong and musky, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead. The kind of smell that makes you breathe through your mouth. I'd encountered plenty of roadkill during my years of towing, but this was different, more intense, and somehow fresher. Getting out to attach the chains, I played my flashlight around the Honda and immediately understood why the woman was so terrified. On the roof of her car were 2 massive handprints pressed deep into the metal. Not scratches or dents from debris, but actual palm and finger impressions where something had gripped the roof hard enough to deform it. Each handprint was easily twice the size of mine, with long finger marks that ended in what looked like claw scratches. Fuck, I muttered, running my flashlight along the car's perimeter. There were more marks, scratches along the passenger side, like something had tested the strength of the windows, and gouges in the paint where claws had scraped across the metal. Now you see why I wouldn't get out, the woman called from inside the car, her voice muffled by the glass. I was crouched, down examining the damage when the first branch broke. Not a small twig snapping under the weight of a squirrel, but a substantial branch, the kind that takes real force to break. The sound came from somewhere deeper in the trees, maybe 40 yards from where I was working. I stood up and played my flashlight in that direction, but the beam only penetrated about 20 feet into the fog before getting swallowed up. Then came another branch. Crack. This one closer, maybe 30 yards away. Then another. Crack. From a different direction, entirely. Sir? The woman's voice was tight with anxiety. It's doing that thing again. What thing? The knocking. It's been doing it all night, breaking branches, hitting trees, like it's trying to scare me. As if responding to her words, a loud thump echoed through the forest, the unmistakable sound of something heavy striking a tree trunk. Then another from different locations around us, creating a pattern of impacts that seemed to be moving in a circle around our position. I worked faster to attach the chains, trying to keep my movements efficient and quiet. The whole time I was acutely aware of being watched. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you from across a room? It was like that, but amplified. Like something with very focused attention was studying every move I made, and growing increasingly agitated by our presence. As I was tightening the last chain, my flashlight flickered and went out. I shook it, smacked it against my palm. Nothing. The batteries had been fresh when I started my shift, but now it was completely dead. I had a backup light in the truck, but that meant walking 20 feet in the dark. The branch knocking stopped. The forest went completely silent. Sir? What happened to your light? Battery died. I'm going to get another one from the truck. Don't leave the car. Please. The fear in her voice was palpable. And standing there in the darkness, surrounded by that oppressive silence and the lingering smell of wet animal, I found I didn't want to leave her either. I'll be right back. Just getting another flashlight. I walked to my truck as casually as I could manage, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. The fog seemed to have gotten thicker, and the Honda's headlights only created small pools of illumination that made the surrounding darkness feel deeper. I grabbed my backup flashlight from the cab and was turning to head back when a sound froze me in place. It started as a low rumble, almost subsonic, that I felt in my chest before I actually heard it. Then it rose into something between a roar and a howl, a guttural primal sound that seemed to come from something with a throat structure unlike any animal I knew. The call lasted maybe 5 seconds, echoing through the trees and seeming to come from all directions at once. When it ended, the silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. That's when the creature stepped into the Honda's headlight beams. Sir? The woman's voice was urgent now. We need to go, right now. I didn't argue. I climbed into my truck, put it in gear, and started pulling the Honda back toward the road. The chains were taut, the car rolling smoothly behind me, when something massive crashed through the underbrush directly in front of us. It stepped into the full glare of my headlights, and for one terrifying moment, I saw it clearly. The creature was enormous, at least 9 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in thick, shaggy, dark hair that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the arms so long they nearly reached its knees. Its hands ended in fingers that looked more like thick, clawed talons. But the worst part was its face. It resembled that of a human, but with proportions that shouldn't exist on neither man nor beast. The eyes were deep-set and intelligent, reflecting my headlights with a yellow-green shine. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth that were designed for tearing. It stood there in the road for maybe 3 seconds, studying us with that terrifying intelligence. Then it began walking toward my truck. Go! The woman screamed from behind me. Go, go, go! I gunned the engine, hoping to scare it off, but the creature didn't flinch. Instead, it picked up speed, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. My truck lurched forward, the Honda's weight dragging behind me, but we were moving too slowly. The creature reached my driver's side door just as I managed to get us rolling. Through the window, I found myself looking up into its face from less than 3 feet away. It placed one massive hand against my door, and I heard the metal groan under the pressure. The handprint it left behind completely covered the window. Fingers, easily twice the length of a human's, with what looked like thick black claws at the tips. For a moment we were locked in this impossible stare down, me gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had gone white, and this thing studying me with eyes that held far too much awareness. I could hear its breathing, deep measured breaths that fogged the glass between us. Then something seemed to shift in its expression, and it stepped back. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I floored the accelerator, pulling the Honda behind me as fast as the tow chains would allow. In my side mirror, I watched the creature grow smaller, but it didn't disappear into the forest. It just stood there in the middle of the road, watching us go. We didn't stop until we reached the gas station, 8 miles down Route 47. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the truck in park. Behind me I could hear the woman crying, not hysterical sobs, but the quiet crying of someone who'd just survived something that shouldn't be survivable. When I finally got out to unhook her car, I saw what the creature had left behind. There was a handprint pressed deep into the metal of my truck's door, not just on the surface, but actually deformed inward, like the metal was soft clay. Each finger had left a distinct impression, complete with claw marks that had scratched through the paint down to bare steel. The woman stood next to me, staring at the evidence of what we'd just encountered. Those weren't there before, she whispered. No, I agreed. They weren't. We stood there in the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station, both looking at proof that what we'd experienced was undeniably real. Physical evidence that something impossibly strong had touched our vehicles, had been close enough to kill us both if it had chosen to. "What do you think it wanted?" she asked. I thought about those intelligent eyes, the way it had studied us both so carefully. "I don't think it wanted to hurt us," I said finally. "I think it was curious." She nodded slowly, like it was trying to figure out what we were. I called in sick for the rest of my shift and drove straight home. Spent the next hour sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what had happened. The rational part of my mind kept searching for explanations. Maybe someone in an elaborate suit, maybe a circus animal that had escaped. But the handprints on my truck door told a different story. No person, no matter how large, could have compressed steel like that. And no known animal moved the way that creature had moved. I still work the night shift. I still take calls along Route 47 when they come in. But now I carry extra flashlights, and I never work alone in areas where the trees grow thick and the fog rolls in heavy. I had the handprints on my truck filled and painted over, but sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving those dark stretches of highway, I run my fingers over the spot where they were, and remember, because whatever's out there in those woods, it's still out there. And now I know it's curious about us. That might be the most terrifying thing of all. Story number 4. Like a lot of people, I drive to get from my job to my home and back. I tend to see cars, trees, birds, the usual. The occasional deer even, so I never really thought anything was wrong. But that was until I get home. I walk up the stairs to my room, I realize I saw a deer. A memory flashes into my head of seeing just a lone deer alongside a road just grazing on some grass. But it feels like I just saw. I guess I saw it on my way home today. The memory seems weird, though, just popping up now. The next day I drive to work and keep an eye out for deer. If there was one yesterday, there may be more today. The area around my home tends to get a lot of deer coming through, the more the year goes on. My mom always seems to see some each day, despite the fact I only see some, like, once every 2 weeks. I get in and get ready in the back to start cooking like normal. A couple hours in, I get the same sensation again that I just saw a deer. Unlike yesterday, where I chalked it up to me just remembering it, because the stairway carpet is somewhat the same color of a deer's fur when the stairway gets dark. I am currently cutting tomatoes, and nothing of that color is in sight. I look up through the order window, or whatever people call it, to see if a deer was in the parking lot in the windows across the lobby, but I saw nothing. The memory was of a deer in a field this time, which makes no sense. Unlike yesterday, the deer is not grazing, but appears to be looking off to the side. Dwelling on it really made it hard to focus, and I got a couple orders wrong. I left at around 8, since it was one of my shorter days, and went home. I did not get any more memories, but I did see a trio of deer in our backyard. It ain't like a field, but it ain't small either. Plenty of space. The deer fled as I pulled up the driveway. When I parked, there were none left. As I fell asleep, I had a dream. Nothing crazy and surprisingly not deer-related, I think. It was just me walking through a field, into a house similar to mine, and staring at a bed. Not much else, and definitely not the weirdest yet. I woke up the next day and got ready. But as I got in my car, I noticed that there was a deer in the yard, just standing there by itself, and surprisingly did not flee. As I turned on my car, I backed up and left, not thinking much of it, besides that it might be an unfortunate deer with that wasting disease if it did not run. Today felt different, though, especially since I kept seeing a bunch more lonesome deer walking around. I guess this must be what my mother is like some days, just constantly seeing deer. I even thought one got hit because I drove past one in the middle of the road, just standing there when a car passed me going the other way. Looking back, I saw the car did not swerve, but the deer was now alongside the road, thankfully appearing unharmed. As I got to work, I asked my boss if they have seen all the deer that have been wandering around, but surprisingly, they have not. I guess my luck must be like my mother's if I am seeing all these deer now. Annoyingly, though, it is distracting to see deer walking in the parking lot, especially since I am working the register today. Leaving for home, there is another deer, this time standing next to my car. As I approach, it bolts running across the road and nearly getting hit by a car that does not brake or honk. Really did not care about hitting that deer, I guess. I get home and decide to go lay down since my head feels like it is swimming. At some point, I must have passed out because I awoke to find it dark, and it looked like something was standing next to my bed. I turn on my phone's flashlight to see the face of a deer staring at me in bed. I call for my mom, but she either is still not home or is sound asleep. I try and look away from the deer, but I still see it. It's in front of me, still. I turn my head again, still there. I try and get up, but I feel it ram its head into my gut. sending me back onto my bed. I blink, and it gets closer. I close my eyes and open them, hoping it's a bad dream, but as I open my eyes, all I see is that deer in my face, unblinking, and all I feel is my chest as the hooves press down more, like it cracking my rib cage as it begins to jump up and down, and my head throbs in pain like never before. If this is a nightmare, I know now that I will never wake up because I no longer see anything but a deer. I think nothing but about this deer, and I feel nothing but the pain in my chest as a deer is sitting on my heart. Story number 5. Churches always have secrets. They are too old and too important not to. I used to enjoy the fact that I knew all the ins and outs of that building, but now I wish that I didn't. Over the course of the last year, I've been slowly earning back my parents' trust. If you ever went to college and met a guy who started out a devout Christian and ended up a drunken failure, you know what I was like. It apparently happens fairly often. People like me just can't handle suddenly not having their overbearing parents no longer watching them and go a little too far with their freedom. Dropped out and had to crawl back to my family, where I went through the 10 steps, and I like to think I've turned myself around. Despite my thoughts, however, my parents have been reluctant to trust me again. So in order to get them back on my side, I've been doing a number of favors for the church on my own time, as it's quite frankly the only thing that seems to work. Slowly I've been inching my way towards my failure being a joke that we laugh about, instead of a thing we pretend didn't happen. Today I had volunteered to help get rid of some rust that had started growing on the metal legs of some stairs in the church balcony. Rust dissolver takes some time to set in before you can actually scrub it away, so I had a half hour to wait. And I unfortunately got nostalgic. Both my parents worked within the school that the church was associated with. Over the 24 years of my life, I've lived and breathed this building. I know about the secret tunnel that was made in the 80s. I know about the hidden elevator that's used just for a storage room. I've been in every room of the original campus. Until today, I thought I was the only person who had. In order to get across how strange and unsettling what happened, is I need to give some background on the church as a building. The original campus was created over 100 years ago by German immigrants. The building was made out of brick and has glass windows so old, valuable, and irreplaceable that they are protected by bulletproof glass. 50 years after that, they built on the first addition. The church has a Gothic revival architecture, the kind that you see stand out in the middle of a modern city. The first addition is simply a block. It's a brick block that they built onto the side. It is as simple as can be. Then they started getting the checks. During my lifetime, the church made 2 more additions to the original campus, modern and sleek, in a way that contrasted that old German brick. In a way you can almost view the passage of time by walking around the city block that the church had spread out to. From there, at least 3 other schools had been branched out. When I went to the school on the original campus once every 2 months or so, we would have an assembly where a new comically large check would be presented from some Inks or Co., and all the students would all thank the nice businessman in unison. Every room in this campus is used. Kids are pouring out of the windows during the school year, and in the summer, multiple groups use the campus as a base of operations. Out of all the hard-to-find nooks and crannies, Only 2 places are really secret. The tunnels I mentioned earlier, and the second tower. Like any good church worth its salt, this one has a bell tower. It's used every week and isn't a secret at all. But when they built the church back in the 1900s, they copied blueprints from a church back in Germany that had 2 towers. At the time, the large checks had not started coming in, so they didn't end up finishing the second tower. Instead, they roofed it off at around half the 3/4 the height of the main tower and left it. From the outside, you can see the difference clear as day. Until today, I thought that me and my dad were the only ones who knew how to get to it. As I said, when I was waiting for the rust dissolver to set in, I got nostalgic. The balcony where I was cleaning was in the upper part of the church and had a small door that took you to the bell tower. I had been up there a few times for different reasons, but the one that I always remember was when I went up on September 11th, 2013. And yes, before you comment, I know I've been talking about towers, but the only relation that date has to this story is why I was going up there. A fire station is about 2 blocks from the church. I was born right before 9/11, so every year of my life, except the first, the bells have been rung in 4 sets of 5 to honor the firefighters that gave their lives. Specifically, what the school does is they bring all the kids out and line them up by the station and have them all stand still with the firefighters. I was 12 at the time and had gone on that silent walk a number of times. Students never really stayed quiet, and the teachers had to stay on their toes in order to try and keep the whole thing presentable. A few teachers came down with the same flu some kid had brought in, and it was all hands on deck. So in order to save another teacher, they pulled me from the line and told me to meet my dad on the balcony. My dad told me on the way up that they picked me because they knew if I fell down and broke my leg, that my family wouldn't sue them. The tower was filled with scrapped old metal from past repaired that had piled up over a century. Plus the wooden steps that led up had gaps a stupid and small person could potentially go through. So taking a goody two-shoes like me with their dad watching them was probably the right choice. If you are wondering why 2 people had to be present to operate the bell, you have to ring the bells and also stop them. If you didn't stop the reverb, it would go on for too long. So 2 ropes hung from the ceiling at different points, 1 for each purpose. Similar to that stupid rust dissolver, we had a bit of time to wait until the bells were needed. For whatever reason, my dad was in a great mood. He let me walk up to the actual ceiling, which is crazy as I think about it, as it wasn't even stairs that went up. Literal floorboards had been shoved into the side of the wall that you climbed up. It was awesome. On the way down, I had the ability to look on the other side of the pile of scrap metal and noticed that a rectangular door was on the other side. My dad let me shimmy past them and open it up. It was the attic of the church. As I said, the first tower is the tallest, and the second is a little shorter. But the attic was the portion in between that was probably 1/2 as tall as the bell tower. It was very dark, but on the other side was a door with light outlining. I asked my dad to borrow his phone so I could use the flashlight on it. He tossed it to me and told me to keep track of time, as I needed to be back in around 5 minutes to help with the bells. That sounds so bad for a parent to do, but I swear this was the only time I can remember my father being like this. Flashing the light around the room is made of 3 platforms with 2 large gaps in between. At the bottom of the gaps were wool insulation. I remember thinking I would probably live if I fell down. To the right of the door, though, was a few wooden planks nailed together. I picked it up and put it over the first gap before walking to the middle. Then I picked it up again to walk to the door on the other side. As you probably guessed, that door led to the other tower. When I opened it up, the room was yellow, old and deteriorated. I honestly didn't feel safe about stepping foot into the room, because I was worried about whether or not the floor would collapse. But across that small room was a ladder leading up, and a window that the light outlined the door was coming through. My dad shouted out for me to come back. I had spent so long getting across that the 5 minutes were almost up. I turned back and rushed across with the planks, and I rang the bells with my dad before going back to class. I was remembering this when I thought to myself, why not go and see what was up that ladder? So I went up, and after pushing some metal around, I managed to crouch down into that square door. When I turned on my phone's flashlight, I looked around me to see where the planks were. They were not near the door. I looked up and down the sides of the attic I was standing on and didn't see them. Flashing my light over to the other side, I managed to find them. They were placed so that you could move from the middle to the other tower. In my head, I was still contemplating this when the room became darker for just a second. A shadow had washed over the light that was coming from the door as I heard the sound of creaking wood. It took me a second, but I realized what that meant. Someone was in the room and had walked across, blocking the window. Rushing back to the balcony, I decided to wait for my 30 minutes to end by staring at the bottom of that staircase, hoping that some old janitor would eventually walk down. They didn't. Instead, nobody came down. The timer on my phone went off, and working as fast as I could, I wire brushed the metal legs till they shined. During that time, I had convinced myself that whoever was in that room was probably a janitor, and was just as curious as me as to what was up there. So after I calmed down a bit, I went back up and called out to see if someone would respond. I heard nothing. As I stepped into that square door, my feet immediately stepped onto something. The planks were back on this side. I would have sworn to you that nobody could have possibly come down without me hearing or noticing. My curiosity was higher than ever, so I picked up the planks and made my way across. When I opened the door, I saw that the old yellow floor I remembered had caved in. No ladder existed. Whatever room it led to had gone with the floor. Looking down, it simply went into the top of some square white ceiling tiles at the bottom. I stared stupidly into the void and thought, whatever did block the light wasn't in the room, and walked across the window. They walked across the door on this side. Just as I realized, I heard the door slam on the other side, and the sound of rushing feet on old wood. The sounds became slowly quieter as I stood still. A few minutes passed before I managed to breathe again. I don't know who was up there or why they didn't say anything when I was visible the entire time. When I looked around more in the attic on the way out, I was expecting to find a pile of cans or trash or something to indicate it was squatter, but the room was empty. The only thing not bolted down was the planks to cross. Attempting to not make it obvious I had been in the attic, I brought up if anything big needed to be repaired while I was gone at college. Eventually, with enough steering, my mom mentioned
that the other tower had collapsed on itself during the short while I was at college. Luckily enough, it was only the wooden floors that had rotted through, and the walls were solid enough that they just tossed it all away and put up a new ceiling.
In the deacon's quarters, where the debris had fallen into, I don't want to bring this up with my family, because I know they would think I was drinking again. But whoever or whatever that was can't just be allowed to stay up there. Plus, odds are, during the 2 times I was in that attic, they know what I look like. I don't want to have to worry about some psycho following me from church one day, so they don't get ratted out. If you have any ideas, let me know. I'm open to anything. Story number 6. I hoped I wouldn't recognize the house when I arrived. When I left, I could still smell gun smoke in the air. I could still hear the unfamiliar sound of fear in my father's voice. I didn't want to go back. I had to. Overlook was throwing a homecoming parade. I was every small town's dream. The girl next door made good. Sitting through the discomfort of my first flight, I thought back on the last year of my life. The audition, the funeral, the trial. I had always dreamed of singing, but people from Overlook didn't dream that big. Most girls who grow up in the farm fields around the town's single street only hope to marry before time steals their chance. I grew up watching the show, but I only auditioned when it started accepting videos. I didn't make any money of my own at the community college, and my father could have never afforded to send me to one of the cities. He always said, "I'd buy you the White House if I could pay the rent." He was a good father. For the first hour of the flight, I tried to keep my mind on the playlist. I had to perfect 3 new songs for the finale. One was an old honky, tonk standard I had learned from my grandfather. One was a recent radio hit that no one in my family would have dared call country. I would have to strain to smile through it. And the third was my winner's song, the one that would be my debut single if I won. The music was simple, and the label's songwriter had found the lyrics in the story the show had given me. There it was, again. I turned up the synthetic steel guitar to drown out the story I was trying to forget. When I landed in Overlook's aspirational idea of an airport, the local media was already there, their demands unified in one suffocating shout. "Over here, Jenny! Show us that pretty face!" I wished they would go away, but I had to smile. This is what I always wanted. Y'all take care now. By then, I had memorized the script. Sliding into the car the show had arranged for me, I saw the rising star reporter who had picked up my story. I didn't recognize it, but her blog told it beautifully. A troubled young man, a doomed father, and a sister trying to hold her family together through all-American faith and determination. Her posts never mentioned who had actually been in our house that night. They never mentioned Tommy. When I left, I told myself I would never step foot into that house again. I had begged to go to a hotel instead, but the producers said it would have been too accessible to the media. They made me come home. By the time the driver opened my door, it was too late. Surrounded by the forest of trees Sonny and I had climbed as children, I recognized the house all too well. I remembered what it had been before. Walking up the gravel driveway, I couldn't help but see my brother's window. Dust had started to cling to the inside. Sonny had been in prison for 6 months. The last time I had seen him, I had been shadowed by a camera crew. The producers thought a scene of me visiting him inside made a good package for my live debut. They were right. The silence in the house was all-consuming. Before our mother left, I might have heard her singing hymns off-key while doing chores. The recession took that away in a moving truck. Before last year, I might have heard Sonny and our father arguing over a football game. Then the night that changed everything. Standing in our living room, I was in a museum that no one would care to visit. I walked down the hall to my bedroom. I had changed it as I grew. Changed the posters of my TV crushes for black and white photographs of our family. But it still had the paint, from when my mother painted it before they moved in. Rose pink, my grandmother's favorite color. Time had taught me not to hate it. This was where it happened. My father wasn't supposed to be home that night. Just Tommy and me. Then darkness, confusion, silence. The silence that had never left. The silence I could feel in my bones. Being in my room felt like standing in a space that had died. I came back to the present and placed my costume bag on the bed. I unzipped it and took out the baby blue sundress. None of the other Overlook women would ever wear something so lacy, so impractical. But it did look good on camera. The costume designer had glued more and more sequins onto me as the weeks went on. This dress shined even in the shadows of the house. Once I had changed my sweats for the sundress, I put them in my duffel bag, along with Tommy's t-shirt. I was embarrassed to still be wearing it, but the cotton smelled like his cigarettes. Then I took out the boots. They were still shiny when I unwrapped the vest from the packing paper. They were the most expensive boots I had ever had, but the tassels would have gotten in the way in the barn. I was never going back there. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw someone I had never met. She was a television executive's idea of a good girl from the country. Walking back down the hall, I saw where the summer sunlight fell onto the floor. It was too even. It was supposed to be hard wood, dented from me and Sonny roughhousing. They had to replace it quickly when they couldn't scrub out the red boot prints. Tommy had laughed at my father when he asked him to take off his boots in the house. I had known he was more than rebellious, but that was what excited me. That was how he made me believe he was worth it. We'd been better than Overlook. I started to forget where I was as I stared at the fresh laminate. I would have ripped my dress to shreds and set my boots on fire if I could go back to that night. If I could tell that girl where she'd be a year later. I heard an impatient honk from the driveway. I couldn't be late for the parade. You ready, Miss Jenny? The driver was being professional, but I flinched as he called me by the name the focus group had chosen for me. I sure am. Thank you kindly for your patience. I couldn't even rest with only his eyes watching me. The sky was too big when the driver rolled down the top of the convertible. After the tightness of the old house, the open air above Main Street was a blue abyss. In 1 minute, the driver would start leading me down. In 5 minutes, I'd be on the stage. In 10, I'd accept the key to the city from Mayor Thomas. The advance team had scheduled out every last breath I couldn't take. Listening to the hushed whisper of the fountain that sat on that end of Main Street, I thought of everyone who would be there and who wouldn't. Sonny, for one. The warden wouldn't release him for this. Tommy might be anywhere else. After that night, his father had paid him to go away. He had plenty of money left after paying the district attorney, the judge, and the foreman. But my friends from Sunday school would be there. And my pastor, of course. He had taught me where women like me went. The church's social media said they had been praying for me. They wouldn't have if they had heard what happened in that darkness. If they had heard me. I didn't know what had rattled through the grapevine while I had been away. Everyone had been too genteel to ask questions when I left. They were still eating the leftovers from the funeral. When my first performance went viral, they knew the proper thing to do was cheer on their hometown hero. Still, they had surely heard rumors. Tommy's father was persuasive, but he couldn't bribe the entire town to ignore their suspicions about his son and his late-blooming girlfriend. They had pretended not to see. I had to swallow bile when the car started. Driving down the middle of town, there would be no place for me to hide. Before I could make out any faces in the crowd, we passed the old population sign. Overlook, the county's best-kept secret. Population 100. The old mayor's wife had painted it, sometime in the 1990s, based on the block letters and cloying rural landscape. Time had eaten its way around the wood years ago, but no one bothered to change it. All the departures and deaths kept the number accurate. When the people started, the noise of the crowd was claustrophobic. There weren't supposed to be that many people in Overlook. They manifested in every part of the town that had long been empty. From the car, I couldn't see a single blade of the grass that Mrs. Mayo had always kept so tidy. The crowd had pressed them down. Well, hey, y'all. I remembered what the media trainer had taught me. A soft smile. A well-placed wave. I tried to act my part. All of these people, all too many of them, were there for me. They had shirts with my face on them, and signs that said, "Jenny is my hero." But the sound was wrong. The high-pitched roar should have been encouraging, or even exciting. Instead, just below the noise, their loud shouts felt angry. Each cry for attention sounded like a cry for a piece of flesh. Under the noise, I heard a deeper, harder voice. It sounded like it came from the earth itself. "Welcome home." I wanted to look away, to have just a moment to myself. I couldn't. The eyes were everywhere, and they were all on me. Searching for safety, I looked for a little girl in the crowd. I wanted to be for them what my idols had been for me. I quickly found what should have been a friendly face. The girl wore the light dress and dark boots that had become my signature look over the last month. She even had her long blonde hair dyed my chestnut brown. Her grandmother had brought her, and she was cheering as loud as the women half her age. But the girl was silent. She was staring at me with dead, judgmental eyes. Her sign read, "I know." Somehow, she had heard what I had said in the dark. I tore my eyes away from the girl and fought to calm myself. The show's therapist had taught me about centering. I tried to focus on the rolling of the tires. The sound of children playing caught my attention. The car was passing the park, the one where Sonny and I had played on long summer evenings. Our father hadn't even insisted on coming with us. The boy and girl on the swing were so innocent. Sonny hadn't suspected that danger was sleeping on the other side of the house. I remembered his face in the courtroom. He knew that fighting old money would be hard, but he had looked to the witness stand like I could save him. When I chose the money, Sonny's face lost the last bit of childhood hope he had left. I watched the children run over the stones as I thanked a young man who had asked for my autograph. The children in the park sounded alive. I tried to find signs of life in the crowd. The children there had fallen quiet. Now they all looked at me like the little girl had. Their silence left the sound of the crowd even more ravenous, with only the screams of adults. Rolling past the library, I saw that Mrs. Johnson, my fourth-grade teacher, had brought her son to the parade. He had freckles just like Sonny's, but his eyes felt like a sentence. My stomach dropped when I saw that his sign bore the same judgment as the little girl's. I know. First Baptist Overlook rang its bells behind me. For the first time that day, I was happy. If we were passing the church, it was almost over. As I listened to the old brass clang, the scent of magnolias filled my lungs. Over the heads of the crowd, I could see the top of the tree where I had met Tommy that Wednesday night. It was one of the few times he had come to church. The way he looked at me was holier than anything inside the walls. I knew the Bible better, but we converted each other. By the time the gun went off, we were true believers. That night, feeling each other's skin between my cotton sheets was supposed to be our baptism. My father should never have come home. Then it was over. The driver pulled the car up behind the makeshift stage. The production assistants hadn't planned for a town like Overlook. The platform was almost too big for the square. The town hall loomed over me as my boot heels hit the red brick. This place had raised me. I prayed I would never see it again. An assistant led me up the stairs from the car to the stage. Before he gave me the cue, we looked over my outfit one more time. It was fresh from the needle, but the assistant still found a loose thread. I looked down to check for wrinkles like my mother had taught me. The fabric was ironed flat, but there was a stain on the skirt edge. Red, jagged. It was only the size of a dime, but I knew it hadn't been there when I took the dress out of the bag. When I looked back at it, it was the size of a quarter. The nerves under the stain spasmed with recognition. It was too late. The assistant waved me onto the stage. I braced for the applause. There was no sound. All of the countless mouths were shut tight. All of the eyes looked at me, at the blood stain on my skirt. My shaking legs told me to run. Before I could, Mayor Thomas barged onto the stage. Never breaking from her punishing positivity, she approached the podium like it was her birthright. With her well-fed frame, her purple pantsuit made her look like a plum threatening to spill its juice all over the stage. "Hello, Overlook," she cheered. I stood like a doll as I watched the crowd. Mayor Thomas smiled for the applause that wasn't there. "I am so happy to be with you here today to celebrate our little town's very own country star. She's the biggest thing that's come from our neck of the woods since I don't know when. Maybe since I was her age." The people usually humored Mayor Thomas's self-deprecating humor. Only the mayor laughed then. I looked to see where I was on the stage. I was inches away from the steps down. I thought about running for them, but it was too late. No one in the crowd was watching Mayor Thomas. Something glinted under the sun. It was at the back of the crowd, standing apart from the town, but still part of it. It was a motorcycle, Tommy's motorcycle. Feet away, Tommy stood smoking a cigarette where it should have blown over the crowd. He had come back for me. We would make it out after all. I looked up towards his familiar brown eyes. They were watching me like the rest of the town, but they weren't staring. They were snarling. He was laughing at me. I was foolish enough to trust him, and now I have to live with his bullet in my chest. He was long gone. His father sent him away with the money we had stolen to run away. It was nothing. To him? Well, that's enough from me. Ain't none of y'all want to hear this old bird sing. Mayor Thomas's chins shook as she laughed to herself. The crowd insisted on its unamused silence. Let's have a warm overlook welcome for... I felt something warm on my chest. I looked down and saw that my entire chest was stained red. It was wet where my father had been shot. Jenny. I obeyed the mayor's cheer and walked to the podium with a friendly wave. From the pictures I've seen since then, I looked like the princess next door. Mayor Thomas's handshake was a force of nature. A reporter's camera flashed like lightning, even under the burning sun. Surely they could see the stains spreading over my dress. Just as I had practiced, I leaned into the microphone and cooed. Hey, y'all. Mayor Thomas clapped alone. In the middle of another choreographed wave, I noticed the blood had reached my hand. Welcome home, Jenny. Now we're going to give you an honor that only a few people in our town's history have ever gotten. The last one was actually mine from Mayor Baker in 1971. But who's counting? Her chins shook again as she gestured for her assistant to bring the gift. It was an elegant box made of polished wood and finished in gold. I had seen the mayor's box in City Hall. Your very own key to the city. The silence reached a deafening volume. This was the moment I had come back for. More cameras flashed, but the eyes didn't blink. The only person who seemed to understand what was happening was a man standing by himself. He was closer to the stage than anyone else. Security should have stopped him. He wore a department store suit and ragged tie. His shirt was dark and wet around his heart. I recognized him, and I wasn't on stage anymore. I was back in my bedroom. He was coming home. His business trip must have been canceled. Tommy was climbing off of me. He looked afraid and angry. I knew what was coming. I had to choose. Tommy threw on his t-shirt and jeans and grabbed the duffel bag. We had to leave right then. I was petrified when my father came through the door. Time stopped when he saw the pistol Tommy had left on my vanity. My father had always been too protective. He thought I was too good for Tommy, but I knew he was my first and last love. The radio had taught me about our kind of love. Tommy and my father both reached for the gun. I knew my father would never hurt Tommy, but he would never let me leave with a boy like him. Tommy grabbed the gun and pointed it at the man who would keep me from him. He wanted to be Johnny Cash, but his face showed him for the trust fund. Baby he always would be. Even with his cowardice, I had chosen him. My father lunged towards me. I heard myself saying what I thought a girl in love was supposed to say. Stop him, Tommy. Shoot him if you have to, if you love. Then the sound of my father's knees falling on the hardwood beside my bed. And there he was again, watching me from the crowd like he had that night. I took the wooden box from the assistant. It was engraved with my birth name and my father's family name, the name that had been mine just a year ago. Jenny was the only part they had. Let me keep. Inside the box, set delicately in red velvet, was the pistol. Tommy's pistol. Now, Jenny, Mayor Thomas needled, will you do us the honor of singing us into Overlook's first ever Jenny Day? I couldn't do it anymore. The crowd was watching me. Everyone I had ever known could see the blood drowning out the blue on my dress. They had always known. I could never forget. I walked to the microphone. It barely carried my soft, "I'm sorry." The sound of Tommy's gun echoed down Main Street. I woke up to a pale nurse with curly blonde hair smiling above me. "Good morning, Miss Superstar. Her name is Nurse Mindy. Apparently she's a fan. She said the whole town voted for me. When the show re-aired my performances, I won without ever having to sing. No one has asked how I felt on that stage. The host said I fainted from the heat and exhaustion. The therapist said I dissociated. No one has asked, but I know what I saw. I still have specks of blood in my nail beds. My hospital room is smothered with flowers. The record deal is on my bedside table, waiting for my signature. It was all worth it. I believe that until I look in the bathroom mirror. I don't look like myself anymore, but she does. That little girl from the parade, in my dress, my hair, and my boots. She's always behind me now. She still has her sign. I know. Story number 7. Frankly, I'm on the fence when it comes to the supernatural. I'm not completely sold, but I'm not going to rule it out completely. However, recently, I've decided to reconsider that belief. This story happened a month or so ago in July. Me and my friends had planned out this exciting camping trip to Appalachia. We had an Airbnb and everything prepared. Okay, don't judge me. I didn't want to sleep in a tent. Anyways, it would be a nice change of pace from Iowa. I'd take trees over cornfields any days. The only caveat was the 12-hour drive. Now, before I continue the story, I'll introduce my friends, so none of you all are confused. I've got 3 other friends. There's Emma, Matt, and Parker. We had brought along Emma's little brother, who I'll call C, since he's a minor. Emma's parents were arrested for things that aren't really important for this story, but now C's under Emma's legal guardianship, and she couldn't find a babysitter for him. None of us really cared. In fact, we thought C was cool. Anyways, we arrived at the Airbnb and unpacked. There were 3 rooms, so I got a room alone. Matt and Parker got a room together, and Emma and C got a room together. I got lucky. Now, it was around 6 p.m.-ish, probably. So we decided to set up a campfire and start roasting marshmallows. We ended up forgetting the marshmallows. No matter. Me and Matt decided to go drive to the nearest town and pick up some from the store. C wasn't happy, but we assured him that we'll be back in 10 minutes. While driving to the store, me and Matt talked about Appalachia. Maybe we'll see a skinwalker, said Matt. Dude, shut up. Aren't those things located in Navajo territories? There is no way we'd encounter one here in Appalachia, I said, and I knew I was right. We arrived at the local convenience store and argued over what kind of marshmallows we should get. I suggested regular marshmallows. Matt suggested pink marshmallows. We eventually came to a decision, and I bought a Hershey's bar as well, since I figured we'd need extra, considering how much of a fat-ass Parker is when it comes to candy. After paying, we drove back to the Airbnb. C told me that he saw a deer and was very proud of getting close to it. Emma affirmed this, apparently. This deer's eyes were on the front of its head, but it didn't appear hostile, so she let C get close enough to it to not disturb it in any way. In addition to roasting marshmallows, we'd be making burgers and hot dogs. We lit the fireplace and began cooking the meats. That is when a hiker walked up to our campfire. He had a duffel bag, introduced himself as Josh. He asks if he could use our campfire. We were weirded out, but agreed. Josh opened his duffel bag, revealing a bunch of different kinds of meat. There was chicken, beef, venison, and what looked like pork. Emma questioned this, and Josh states that he thinks it's pork. He found it in a cooler, tucked underneath a blind. According to Josh, there was no one around, so he took it. Emma immediately states that she wants the pork. She absolutely loves bacon. Josh shrugs and agrees, but does warn Emma that he didn't know how long the pork was left out there. Emma ignored his warning and insisted on having it. Parker spoke with Josh while me, Emma, and Matt were trying not to horribly burn the meats. Once finished, I had some burgers. Matt and Parker ate some hot dogs and some of Josh's game, while Emma ate the pork. Emma started to feel sick. Damn. So the pork was left out for a while. Josh just threw out the rest of the pork, and Emma went to go puke. We finished eating dinner and began roasting marshmallows. We had way too many marshmallows, so we couldn't actually finish them all. But as expected, Parker's Fatass finished the Hershey's bar. I went in to check on Emma. She had finished puking, and she looked a little pale. Not a sickly pale, just drained. I told her to take some Pepto and get some sleep. I didn't want to hold to make her feel bad or think that she somehow ruined this trip. I went back outside to wave a goodbye Josh, who warned about black bears. Then me, Parker, Matt, and C hung out for an hour before it started to sprinkle and then rain. We went inside and decided to just go to sleep. Emma didn't want to sleep in the same room as C, since she was sick with God knows what, and didn't want it to spread to C. Matt figured it was just food poisoning, but still had C crash in my room. Instead, I didn't protest, but I made it clear that I wasn't happy. So much for sleeping alone. Anyways, we got ready for bed and fell asleep. Well, C did. I did not. It heard loud rustling outside. Didn't think too much about it. But what was strange was quiet everything was. It got up and opened up my window a crack to let air in, and didn't hear anything. No cicadas, no insects, nothing. Just the wind howling through the trees and the rain. I shut the window and went back to bed. I laid in bed for a few minutes before I heard something get thrown at the window. I turned my head to look at the window. Nothing but darkness. Something about it didn't sit right with me. I got up and walked to the living room. I had to make sure if I locked all the doors. The floor creaked under every step I made. I checked the front door, locked. I checked the back door, locked as well. But then I heard Emma's voice. She was on the other end of the glass door. "Let me in," said Emma. I looked through the glass door and didn't see anyone. But then again, I couldn't see anything much at all. "Emma? What are you doing out there?" I asked. It took her a second to respond, but she eventually did. A simple, "It's cold." This struck me as odd, so I went to Emma's room and found her, sleeping on her bed, facing away from the door. I froze. If Emma was here, then who was outside? I slowly closed the door, but stopped. I noticed she was in the fetal position while sleeping, and mumbling. The fetal position wasn't the strange part. She did puke a few hours earlier, but the mumbling. Emma doesn't talk in her sleep. I know that for a fact. And what she was mumbling was weird. She was mumbling in no language I recognized. I grabbed the desk lamp, just in case. I pushed the door open and walked in. I held the lamp like weapon. I looked as she turned over to face me, and then she opened her eyes. We both screamed, and I dropped the lamp. To her, it looked like I was gonna hit her over the head, and her scream had startled me. Parker and Matt walked into the room. They looked annoyed. "The hell happened?" asked Matt. I explained that I heard Emma's voice outside. I looked at Emma. She looked fine. Too fine. She didn't look like she threw up only hours prior. I looked at her pillow. A little bit of her hair was on the pillow, like it fell out. We walked out to the living room, and Parker opened the back door and stepped outside, only to soaked by the rain. However, a cold, eerily cold breeze crept into the Airbnb. It stepped out with Parker and turned on my phone to use it as a flashlight. Saw footprints, human footprints. Me and Parker went, "Oh, hell no," and went inside, locked the door, and we barricaded the shit out of it. Emma asked if it was Josh. Matt shot down that idea. Josh was far too nice, not the stalk innocent campers type. Suddenly we heard a knock on the back door. "Hey, open up," said a voice that sounded exactly like Josh. Emma snapped, "Go to hell." It was out of character for her. It almost seemed territorial. The thing outside stopped. It began circling the Airbnb, tapping on the walls, before seeming to leave. We all decided to just go back to sleep. Day 2, the events of the previous night were still imprinted into our brains. We made breakfast, which Emma swallowed up like it was her last meal. We agreed to cut the trip short. After breakfast, we packed up and went outside, only to find my van's tires slashed. Shit. Our phones didn't have service due to the storm the previous night, and the closest town was a mile or so away. If we wanted to get new tires, we'd have to push the car through the forest for a mile. But we didn't have a choice. We put C in the car, along with Emma and me. Parker and Matt began to push. However, we stopped. Yeah, it'd be hard. Even harder downhill. The road winds and twist. It'll roll downhill and right into a tree if we'd push it. We were trapped. We accepted defeat and just went back inside the Airbnb. I silently prayed that we wouldn't have to stay a second night in this god-forsaken place. Emma kept getting hungry and ate through a majority of our snacks. Everyone was getting weirded out by her behavior. I went outside to look at the tracks from the previous night. Human, yes, absolutely. I followed them. I wasn't stupid, so I didn't follow them into the tree lines. I saw how they seemed to shift into that of a bear. I stepped back and ran back to the Airbnb. Before entering, I saw a truck pass and waved them down. It was Josh. Thanked me for letting him cook dinner for himself at the fire pit. Josh then looked at my van and saw the slashed tires. "Damn," he said. "What happened?" "I don't know." I told him. I then asked if he was outside the Airbnb last night. Josh looked at me and said that his home is decently far from here. He was not here. Josh, however, said something that almost made me jump. He could attach my van to his truck and drive us to the town. I agreed and thanked him. I ran inside to get the others. We watched from the porch as Josh knelt by the hitch. Eventually, he let us get in and began driving us to the town. I was in the passenger seat of his truck, while the others were crammed in the van. I looked at the tree line. I could swear I could see a shadow dash between the trees. Josh broke the silence and asked where I was from. I told him, and he laughed, a nervous laugh. Josh glanced towards the trees and asked if I had seen that too. I froze. He had seen it too. That thing between the trees. I could see Josh started to panic slightly. He pressed harder on the gas. Whatever was out there, it was chasing us. It didn't want us to leave. Josh honked the horn in a clear attempt to scare it away. But it didn't. We noticed the most putrid odor that I have ever smelt. It was so pungent that even with the windows close, we could still smell it. It followed us all the way until we made it to the town. Josh drove us to the car shop and unattached my van. We paid for new tires and put them on. Finally, we could leave. We thanked Josh one final time and then began driving all the way back to Iowa. I prayed it didn't follow us home. It didn't seem to follow us, and we drove back without issue, except for Emma. She was off, a little more violent, and it even started freaking out C. She insisted on beef jerky instead of her typical spicy chips. She barely spoke after that, never replied to texts, never picked up our calls, and barely attended our college classes. None of it, in fact. Last I saw of her was recently, when she picked up C from his first day of school. She seemed off, thinner, hollow even. Eyes were sunken in. I walked up to her and tried talking with her. She said nothing and just got into her car. I spoke to C. He told me that he didn't feel safe with her anymore. I'm concerned for Emma and C. I don't know what happened to her. If anyone out there has any ideas of what I could do, please tell me, because I don't know what to do now. Story number 8. My fascination with ghosts and the paranormal began 2 years ago. It was a cool summer night, and it was beginning to rain. Me and my friends, Dan and Todd, were walking back home from a night on the town, which isn't saying much as we live in a small town with a population of 1,400 people. We were walking down Redacted Street. Despite Dan's protest, he hated taking this path home because of the decaying school that sat dormant on this street. Rumor around town was that the school is haunted. People say they have heard screaming and wailing from the school at night, but Todd says it's all bullshit. It's a large modern brick building standing 2 floors tall and takes up the entire block. It was once a nice up-to-date school, but it closed down a couple of years prior due to a dwindling student population. A year later it was bought by an old mechanic in town, and he intended to renovate it into a hotel. But the city said the school was on the verge of being condemned due to the West Wing's 2nd floor being on the verge of collapse. So now it sits nearly empty. The mechanic Charlie lives alone in the school and works out of the old auto shop room. So his investment wouldn't be a complete waste. Charlie denies the claims of the school being haunted. As we walked closer to the school, Dan and Todd were arguing about how haunted the school was. I just don't see why we couldn't take a different route home. Dan said, "This area gives me the heebie-jeebies. This is the fastest route home, and I'm not trying to get caught in the rain." Todd replied, "It's just a bunch of small-town gossip is all. This town has nothing else going on, so they make things up to stay interesting. I went here when I was a kid," I added. "There's nothing scary about it." The closest occurrence we had was me almost dying of boredom a couple times. Yeah, very funny. Dan sighed. My dad says he refuses to step foot on this street after what he heard one night. Okay, but your dad is also a drunk, so who knows what he actually heard, said Todd. As Dan and Todd continued bickering about how scary the school was, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from nearby. I stopped dead in my tracks. It sounded like a hand tapping on glass. Guys, shut up for a sec. I said, "Do you hear that?" They slowed to a stop, and I realized the sound was coming from the direction of the school. The tapping sound became louder, as if someone was beating on a window. I didn't see anything at first, but as I looked closer into the school, I saw the outline of a girl in one of the lower windows. There, in the west wing, there's a girl in the window on the bottom floor, I stammered as I grabbed my phone from my pocket. Which window? Todd asked. There's a lot of windows, dude. Oh shit, there. I see her, Dan yelled. Opened the camera on my phone to try record a video. But before I could, I heard a piercing scream, and I dropped my phone. I bent down and picked my phone up off the ground. When I looked back up, she was gone. Where'd she go? I asked frantically. She dropped below the window. Dan responded, I don't see her anymore. I continued looking around, but Dan was right. She was gone. Damn it, I exclaimed. I should have got that on video. I didn't see anything. Todd stated, Are you sure you saw a girl? That screech could have been anything. Yes, dude, I'm sure. That was the scariest moment of my life. Now I'm ready to get the hell out of here. Let's go, Dan said, while picking up the pace, back towards home. Wait, shouldn't we find out what the hell that was? I asked. How? It's private property, asked Todd. If you want to call the cops and tell them you saw a ghost girl in the school, you can go right ahead, but I'm going to join Dan and get out of here. It's starting to rain. As he turned to catch up with Dan, I cursed under my breath again, upset that I messed up what would have been the best ghost evidence on the internet. I took one more look at the school before turning around to join my friends. That moment sparked my inspiration to start a YouTube channel. So Todd, Dan, and I launched a channel a few months after. We have been on a dozen ghost hunts by now, with little to no evidence to show for it, but we have amassed 60K subscribers. The closest thing we have to evidence is a door closing on its own during our investigation of an abandoned mall. Todd is adamant that it was a draft, but Dan argues it was definitely something paranormal, and that Todd is ignorant. Other than that, though, all we have caught are some loud creaks and bangs while investigating abandoned houses, which I realize can easily be brushed off as nothing. I am certain that our big break would be if we could investigate the school. Ever since word of our channel got around town, people have told me many stories regarding that building, and they insist that's what we should investigate next. I've already tried asking the owner, Charlie, if I could. He said he would if he could, but his insurance doesn't want anyone else going in that building, and that they are already opposed to him living there, as is. So for now, I have just been recording the neighborhood stories to hopefully make into a video later. I woke up this morning to my phone ringing. I rolled over disgruntledly to see Todd calling. What do you want? I answered a bit harshly. Well, good morning to you too, sunshine. Todd responded. Well, excuse me. It is 8 a.m. on a Saturday. What is so important that it couldn't have been a text? I asked. Well, I call with good news. Todd said. Okay, well, what is it then? I replied, curiously. Charlie died. Todd stated a bit too excitedly. I paused before asking, how is this good news, Todd? Well, it's not. But it's good for us, at least, because this means we can finally investigate the school, he replied. I took a moment, thinking it over, unsure what to say. I had only woken up moments ago, and now I'm being told Charlie is dead, and that we should investigate his school. Todd added, Abby just told me. His body is going to the coroner's office this morning. An officer found his car wrapped around a tree. They suspect it happened last night. Todd's wife, Abby, works for the city, so of course she has the inside scoop. There's a slight hitch, though, Todd added. What's that? I asked. Well, Abby tried to notify the next of kin, but all that he had listed was some guy down, south. She told him the news, and he told her that he would be coming up in a couple of days, and that he is going to buy the school when he gets there. Todd said, That's odd. I added, He has quite the list of priorities, I guess. What would he want with a condemned school, anyways? I was wondering the same thing, Todd said. But regardless, that means we would have to investigate it soon, before the buyer gets into town. Todd was right. We could investigate the school now that Charlie is dead. It probably isn't very considerate, but it's a possibility nonetheless, and we wouldn't get another possibility like this again. Okay, I'll tell Dan, I said finally. We will investigate the school tonight. It was well after dark as we approached the school. It's even more ominous when we are this close, especially when it is bathed in the night. The building looks weathered, yet surprisingly current. And, besides for the paint flaking and fading away, it looks just as I remember it from when I was a student. We crossed the empty parking lot, and as we got to the front doors, Todd spoke first. So, do we just walk in through the front door, or did anyone make a plan for how we get inside? He asked. I looked over to Dan, and he gave me a small shrug. As a response, I responded, I guess I didn't consider that part. I put too much thought into whether or not we should, and didn't think about if we even could. Dan let out a light chuckle, saying, I was more worried about if it's more or less illegal to break into a man's house after he is dead. Is it still breaking and entering if he is dead? Or is this just trespassing? I'm no lawyer, and I'm barely a ghost hunter, but from a legal standpoint, I'm gonna say maybe. I joked. Well, he did say he would be okay with it if it weren't for his insurance. Todd replied, Who would we sue now if we got hurt? Okay, that's a reasonable point, I suppose, I said, trying to make myself feel better about this potential crime. But we better figure out a way inside here soon. I don't want any cops to see us. Anyone have any ideas? Todd bent over and grabbed a large rock. No, put that down, dude, Dan said in a hushed shout. That would definitely be breaking and entering. Well, do you have a better idea? Todd asked, as Todd and Dan squabble about the most acceptable way to break into the school. I approached the front doors. I put my hands on the doors and gave it a little push, and to our surprise, they actually opened. He left them unlocked. Asked Dan, I guess. I responded, It is a small town, after all. Maybe he didn't plan to be out for long. Todd and Dan entered the building behind me. The doors closed behind us, and we could hear the sound echo throughout the vast building. We turned on our shoulder lights. The school still has power running to it, but we don't want any neighbors to see. The lights on. The school has an odd aesthetic to it, since it is now redesigned to be a home. We stood in the entryway, which is a large open hallway, now designed as a very open living room. There were a few display cases along the nearest wall that now holds Charlie's shoes and coats. The room has a few couches and an older TV. Neither of them seem to be used in a while. "You guys ready?" I asked, as I pulled out the camera. "Yes, but please don't do your regular intro for our video," Todd pleaded. "Why not? I've done it for every video," I asked. "Dude, it's annoyingly stereotypical. If this video does blow up our channel like you say it will, we can't have that type of introduction for the new viewers," Todd stated. "Okay, well, do you want to do the introduction then?" I asked him. "Well, no, that'd be even worse," he said. "Okay then, I'll do the introduction my way then," I stated. I turned the camera around to face me and hit record. "Good evening, our dubious ghost viewers. We are back again with another investigative video. Tonight, we are investigating my local school. This building is a bit of a local legend. There are so many terrifying stories about this location, so we just had to investigate it. So get ready to start believing in the paranormal, but before you do, don't forget to like and subscribe." I hit pause on the camera, and it was followed by a deafening silence in the room. I could see Todd and Dan holding back laughter. "Agree with Todd. That shit sounds pathetic, dude." Dan laughed finally. "Yeah, I know," I said. "It always does. That one hurt." Todd chuckled while shaking his head. "Can we go explore now with that out of the way?" "Yes, please," I said dejectedly. To the right of the now living room is the gymnasium, and to the left is the swimming pool. We elected to explore the gymnasium first. The gymnasium didn't appear to be altered at all. It also didn't appear to have been used lately. The bleachers are dusty, and the floor looks as if it hadn't been swept in at least a year. I pulled out my camera to record some footage while we performed our tests. Our investigation usually starts with an Ouija board. Most ghost hunters claim this is complete BS, and honestly, we agree. But it does provide some good content. We didn't get much, if any, movement from the board this time, besides for Todd trying to spell out PENIS a couple times. The next test we like to try is the spirit box. Todd absolutely hates this device, and I can see why. But Dan is convinced it is legit. We let the spirit box run for a while. Dan said he heard some related words, but I think he was really stretching his imagination, because all I heard was incoherent nonsense. I usually check an EMF reader while we investigate, but it was very unreliable tonight due to the building actually having power for once. And speaking of power, the air conditioner scared the hell out of us a couple times during the testing. We are used to it being dead silent, and we fine-tune our ears to pick up any noises. So when the AC roared to life, we all jumped. Once we agreed we weren't getting any evidence in this area, we walked across the hall to the swimming pool. The room is humid and smells like chlorine, despite the 12-foot pool being drained. The hot tub had a couple renovations from the last time I had seen it. There is now a TV mounted nearby, and a new mini-fridge sitting adjacent. We ran a few tests in this room as well, with no proof yet again. We wandered over to the locker rooms, which are just outside of the swimming area. We entered the men's room, and it appeared to be well used. I assumed this was Charlie's main bathing area, based off of the fresh towels sitting in the lockers and dirty laundry sitting in a hamper in the corner. The sink has a couple of new drawers built onto it, with his toiletries sitting on top. We didn't stay in here for long or record any video, as it felt invasive, even though he was gone. I stepped back into the hall and took an awkward glance into the women's locker room. "Hey, bud, what you looking at?" Dan asked. "Is this how I find out you are a pervert?" "I'm just curious. Haven't you wondered what a women's locker room is like?" I asked. "Sure, but it's probably the same as the men's, just without the urinals and maybe different paint," Todd stated. "Okay, well, don't you guys want to find out? Now is our chance," I said. "Sure, I suppose. Why not? Let's go peep in the girls' bathroom," Todd said while walking in. When we entered the locker room, we were surprised and speechless from what we saw. The women's room also appears to be well used, but by girls, which was concerning because Charlie didn't have a wife nor kids. The lockers contained towels and girls' clothing, ranging from children's size to adult. The doors on the stalls were removed. Todd broke the silence by saying, "What the fuck? Are you guys disturbed by this as well? This is definitely concerning. This doesn't make any sense," I replied. "Why would Charlie have girls' clothes here? And why so much? It's just him that lives here," Todd asked. Before I had a chance to reply, Dan shushed us, his eyes wide with fear, and stammered, "I think I just heard someone knocking." "As in, knocking how?" Todd asked, still focused on the locker room. "Like when you knock on somebody's front door, politely waiting to be let inside." Dan said, "Could it have been old pipes, maybe?" Todd asked, still looking around the locker room. "No, it definitely sounded like a hand knocking on a door. As in, knock knock, who's there?" Dan said, "I'm telling you guys, knock knock knock." He was interrupted by the knocking. It must have been louder this time, as Todd and I both heard it clearly. Dan was right. It definitely sounded like someone knocking on a door. Even Todd looked like he agreed. I turned my camera on, and we stepped back into the hall. I asked, "Is it coming from the front door? Did someone find out we are here?" "Maybe," Dan said. "It's so hard to tell. The building echoes so much." I started cautiously walking to the front door when we heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. That sounded like it came from down the hall. Todd stated, "That leads deeper into the school. That's the hall that brings you to either the west or east wings," I said. "Well, I don't like that," Dan said as the three of us began walking down the hall. The hall felt as if it was a mile long, and it felt like I was running one based on how hard my heart was beating. I'm excited that this will be the first bit of actual evidence we have ever gotten, but I am also terrified. We finally got to the end of the hall. There are 2 sets of double doors on either side of the hall. The right set of doors are open. They lead into the east wing, which is the high school, assumedly where Charlie used to live. The left doors are chained shut. They lead into the west wing, which is the elementary school. That is the condemned wing, so that's probably why they are chained shut. "Which way do you think it came from?" Todd asked. We got our answer as we heard another knock, knock, knock to the left, and I saw the west wing doors shake and bind against the chains. I slowly approached the doors and asked, "Hello, who is it?" with false confidence. In response, we heard a quick pattering, fleeing from the door, like little footsteps running away in a game of tag. We sat in silence for a moment. my confidence quickly fading. Dan pushed on the doors and said, "We have to get into the West Wing. There is clearly something back there. Do you think Charlie left a key somewhere while he pulled on the lock?" "Maybe," I replied, "but actually the East and West Wings share a lunchroom, so the two sides meet up again at the cafeteria. Maybe those doors are less secure and easier to break into." "Well, let's take a trip through the East Wing then," Todd said. "Before that critter gets away." We all shared a look of agreement and headed through the high school doors. The high school side appears to be more taken care of. The carpet looks recently vacuumed, and the walls have been repainted. We walk through the vacant halls, passing by empty classrooms. I recorded some more with the camera, while Dan and Todd were bickering yet again. Dan said, "There is no way you actually think that was an animal back there. It had to be." Todd responded, "What else could it be? A ghost? A ghoul? Some sort of monster, maybe?" "We are ghost hunting, so yes, I do think it could be a ghost. That is the whole reason we are out here. That's what we are trying to find," Dan stated. Todd stayed quiet, probably because Dan has a pretty good point. "What kind of animal do you think it was then?" Dan asked, half jokingly. "I don't know, that's why we are going over there. It has to be something pretty big, though," Todd said, unconvincingly. "Oh, come on, dude. Seriously? Do you hear yourself right now?" Dan asked. We passed by the auto shop. It lay empty, which seems odd to me. The shop hasn't changed much besides for the addition of Charlie's tools. The room is fairly dusty, but it's hard to tell if that's out of the ordinary for auto shops. The attached classroom is renovated into an office space. A newer computer sits atop his desk, with a few file cabinets sitting along the nearby wall. We searched the office for his keys, but we found nothing, so we kept heading for the cafeteria. I led us through the next corridor and through a shortcut through the library. It has been remodeled into an oversized living room area. A couple, couches, and a reclining chair sat around a large TV with a nice sound system. A couple of the bookshelves now hold an extensive collection of movies and CDs. We planned to come back to this room and investigate it further after we checked out the West Wing. We took a quick detour to explore the principal's office, which is now Charlie's bedroom. The layout reminds me of a small apartment. There's a waiting room when you first walk in, which connects to Charlie's bedroom and main bathroom. It is well decorated. The waiting area has a couple plants sitting in the corners of the room, and the walls are arranged with posters of old metal bands I don't recognize. His bedroom is also well kept. The bed is made, and his nightstand seems organized. We searched this area as well, but did not have any more luck finding the keys. I was beginning to worry that he may have had the keys on him the night he died, but I tried to push that thought away as we continued our expedition to the cafeteria. We finally arrived at the cafeteria. It is a spacious room lined with rows of long tables. I looked closer at the tables and saw something that troubled me. There are about a dozen lunch trays loaded with food sitting on a couple of the tables. The food looks to be only a day or two old. I pointed out to the guys, and Todd seems equally troubled by it. We were confused about why Charlie would need so many trays for himself, but Dan walked by us clearly more interested in the doors that connect to the West Wing, expressing a bravery we haven't seen from him before. He stepped up to the doors and gave them a push. They are locked, so he took a couple of steps back, and before either Todd or I can protest, he kicks the doors open. We caught up to Dan, and I said, "You know, a heads up would have been nice." Dan replied, "Well, we couldn't find the keys, and I don't know of any other ways in. So how else were we going to get into the elementary school?" Todd said, "I don't know, dude. You didn't really give us any time to weigh our options." "Okay, well, it's too late now. So why are we wasting time debating how to get through the doors when I've already kicked them down?" Dan asked smugly, "Okay, fair enough. You make a good point. Let's go then," Todd said, leading the way into the elementary school. Before following them, I record a quick extra bit of footage of the cafeteria, still troubled by the lunch trays. Eventually, I turn back towards my friends, hurriedly closing the gap into the West Wing. The West Wing is more neglected, but still holds the appearance of an elementary school. Most of the rooms still have the old desks and classroom decor, but are covered in a heavy layer of dust. This side of the school smells musty and stale. All of the windows on this side are boarded up. The walls are painted pastel colors, and the floors have colored lines which lead to different portions of the school. We saw no obvious signs of what was knocking on the door earlier, so we decided we should walk back to the first set of doors, in hopes that we might find something closer to where the knocking first occurred. As we got deeper into the elementary school, I noticed something. The West Wing is in very nice condition. It looks clearly abandoned, but it didn't appear to be on the verge of collapse like Charlie said it was. I mentioned it to the guys. "Hey, does this wing look very condemned to you two?" I asked. They paused to look around. Todd said, "I'm no building inspector, but I would agree. This wing does look pretty nice so far. I wouldn't condemn it." Dan commented, "I thought Charlie said it was the second floor that was dangerous. We haven't made it up there yet." "I guess," I said, "but I assumed there would be damage on the first floor as well, if the second floor was about to collapse." They just shrugged and continued exploring. As we traipsed past the computer lab, Dan stopped us, silently raising a hand. "What's up? Why are you acting all Black Ops right now?" Todd whispered. "Do you hear that?" Dan asked. "Do you hear that humming?" We fell silent, and I heard it. It's a sing-songy type of humming coming from within the computer lab. We exchanged nervous glances, and I lead the way, slowly prowling into the room. The lab has numerous computers lining every wall, and a couple rows down the middle. I can hear the humming clearer now that we are inside, but I can't quite make out the song. We can't see the source of the humming right away, so we split up to get a better look. Slowly approach one of the middle rows. I apprehensively looked under the desks, and I discover what is singing. A young girl is crouched under the desk on the far end. She's wearing a dirty, stained nightgown, and her hair is matted. She is rocking back and forth slowly, and I can now hear her whimpering, "They need help," as she hums. I froze, unsure how to proceed. She must have felt my eyes on her because she quit humming and sits still. Slowly she turns her head to look at me. She looks me dead in the eyes, unblinking, and lets out an ear-piercing, raspy shriek. I jump back, terrified, and she leaps at me. I narrowly avoid her, but I somehow manage to drop the camera as she runs. By me and towards the door. She ran into the hall screaming, "You shouldn't be here!" and "Get out!" I look back at the guys. They both sit petrified. "Guys, snap out of it. We gotta follow her," I yell while picking up my camera off the floor. Thankfully, it still works. Dan rushed to my side, and we ran into the hall in the direction. The girl fled. We rounded the corner at the end of the corridor and see the girl standing completely still, with her hand pointing towards the stairs. I stop and pull out my camera, recording clear footage of the girl. She whispers, "They are up there. Please help us." Dan said, "Fuck this, dude. I'm out. We got our footage. That's enough for me." And turns around, racing towards the nearest exit. "Dan, wait!" I yell, pleading. I turn back towards the girl, but she's gone. Nervously, I look around for her. I see fresh footprints in the dust that lead upstairs, but I'm not about to go up there alone. Yeah, fuck this. I agree, and run back the same way as Dan. I found Dan and Todd back in the computer lab. Todd shook out of his horror, but he was still spooked. I approached him saying, "It's time to go, buddy. I got our footage. Let's leave." Dan nodded in anxious agreement, leading us out the door. We quickly retrace our steps back to the cafeteria. I am a bit concerned about Todd. I've never seen him this quiet before, but Dan is able to escort him out ahead of me. We made it back to the cafeteria without event. I turned back momentarily to close the doors behind us. Then we paused briefly to catch our breath. "What the hell was that?" Dan asked, still rattled. "I think that was our first ghost," I said excitedly. "Once we get out of here, I can't wait to say I told you so." Dan said playfully, pushing. Todd laughed anxiously. "Yeah, I guess you guys are right. I think that was actually a ghost. Did you get it on camera?" "Oh yeah, I did. This video is gonna blow us up. The footage I got is perfect. I dare to say the best evidence on the entire internet," I responded. "You guys ready to go home?" "So we can get that footage posted then?" Dan asked. "Yes, I am very ready to get the hell out of here," Todd said. We headed back the way we came, following our footsteps through the high school, through the once home of old Charlie. I still have a lot of questions after this expedition, but for now, I'm focusing on getting home. We made it through the high school easily and got back to the hallway that divides the west and east wings. I let out a sigh of relief as I saw the entryway doors at the end of the hall. I took a moment near the west doors to look at the chains when the door slowly creaked open and rattled as it bound against the chains. A face now peering at us through the gap. As soon as I locked eyes with her, the doors began to violently shake, and I heard a girl's voice yelling and crying, "Let us out, please. Please, you have to set us free. Help us." She started pounding heavily on the door and continued pleading, but we already began running in the opposite direction. We barged through the entryway doors, and I was half tempted to kiss the ground as I stepped foot on the parking lot. I looked around at my friends, their faces mixed with emotions, partially excited but also terrified. We recorded a quick outro outside of the school. I'm unsure if it will be usable since we are so clearly shaken up. Dan gave a couple middle fingers to the old school, but Todd and I didn't look back. Finally, I put the camera away, and we got into my car, relieved to be heading home, and ready to post the video of what we found. It didn't take long for the video to blow up like we suspected. I spent the entire next day editing the video so I could post it as soon as possible. I was able to post it on Sunday night, just a day after our investigation. By Thursday, the video was on the trending tab with 1 million views. Our channel blew up. gaining 500,000 subscribers already, and didn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. We received a dozen DMs from other creators asking to collab, or to ask us for the location of the school. But one DM stuck. Out in particular, it was from an individual named Josh. He was insistent on getting information about the girl we saw. Josh. Hey guys, my name is Josh. Redacted. I just saw your video and I know this may sound odd, but I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the girl. It's urgent. His message made me curious, so I agreed. Sure. What do you want to know about her? Josh, did you happen to see her eyes? If so, what color were they? I didn't really get a good look at them. It was too dark in there. Josh, how about her right forearm? Did you see a scar shaped like a dog bite on her arm? I didn't remember much about her arm, so I looked back at the footage. I start by re-watching when she leapt at me in the computer lab. That's when I noticed something. I didn't drop the camera. She knocked it out of my hands when she jumped at me. I could clearly see her hand hitting the camera, and it was the same arm Josh asked about. I took a closer look at her arm, and saw she did indeed have a dog bite-shaped scar. I sent another message to Josh. Yes, she does have a scar on her arm. How did you know that? Josh, I thought that was her. Please, you need to tell me the location of the school. I can meet you somewhere if you don't trust me. I'm not telling you anything more until you tell me how you knew about her scar, Josh. Okay, fine. I know about her scar because I think the girl you saw in the school is my missing sister. There is a photo attached to the message. I opened it and saw a missing person poster. The girl on the poster looks exactly like the girl I saw in the school that night. Her name is Lucy, redacted, and she went missing 9 months ago from a nearby county. I replied to Josh immediately with my phone number and gave him the location of the school. He told me he doesn't live too far from here, and we agreed to meet at my apartment tonight and then go to the police with our findings. I stand outside the school once again with Josh, Todd, and Dan. But this time the school is bathed in flashing red and blue lights as the sun is setting behind it. The school is surrounded by what appears to be every police officer and EMT in town. The officers breached the school just moments ago, and we were told to wait in the parking lot. Josh made it into town earlier this evening. As soon as he came into my apartment, I knew he was telling the truth. I could see it in his eyes. They looked just like Lucy's. We skipped all formalities as he told me all the details of her disappearance. After I answered all of Josh's questions, we went to the police station. We told the story to the officer at the front desk. Officer Anderson didn't seem to be convinced with our ghost girl in the school story until I showed him the video and Josh pulled out the missing persons poster. Anderson put on his glasses to get a closer look at the girl and saw that we were serious. He showed our proof to some of the nearby officers. They unanimously agreed to start an investigation. Then a couple hours later we arrived here. We weren't technically invited to join the investigation, but no one stopped us either. We sat in the parking lot for what felt like the entire night. But according to my watch, it has been only 45 minutes. The sun has fully set by now, and the night sky is beginning to take over. Finally, the front doors opened. One of the officers exited the building with his arm around Lucy. Josh ran up to her as fast as he could without frightening her. Lucy watched him tensely until she recognized him. Then she smiled and fell into his arms. He said something to her, but I was out of earshot, and I didn't want to intrude. The front doors opened again, and 2 more officers walked out, holding a couple of young girls in their arms. The girls are gauntly thin. They look sickly, but are alive nonetheless. The officers rushed them over to the ambulance. Todd pointed me to the front doors again, and I saw 3 more officers rush out with girls in their arms as well. I overheard the 2 officers talking to the EMTs. There are a couple more girls inside yet. Anderson is working on getting them. 3 right now. 1 teen and 1 adult. These girls were chained upstairs in the elementary art room. The other officer pointed to Lucy and said, "That girl gave us quite the scare in there. She was the only girl not chained up. She said she escaped her chains last week and hit a bad man with a brick, but she hasn't seen him since." The 3 other officers approached the ambulances, setting the girls on the available gurneys, and asked how they could help. An officer named Lincoln turned to us and told us he is going to take Lucy back to the station to treat her there, and see what else she is willing to tell us tonight. Josh and I agreed to come with. By morning, a lot of my questions became answered. Lucy was very open about her experiences in the school. She was very brave, with encouragement from her big brother, Josh. She started by telling us that she tried to hurt Charlie with a brick because he was a bad man, but she couldn't hit him hard enough, and he dragged her back upstairs. That was the night that Charlie got into a car accident. Lincoln is going to look further into the autopsy, but suspects Lucy gave him a concussion, and that caused him to veer off the road as he was driving to the hospital. Eventually, Lucy was able to escape her chains again, but couldn't escape the West Wing since the doors were locked and the windows are boarded up. I felt pretty bad for closing the doors behind me as we fled that night. She also told us that Charlie has been kidnapping the girls from nearby towns. Lincoln pointed out that most of the girls rescued from the school are in the missing persons databases of neighboring counties. He showed the database to Lucy, and she was able to point out a few more girls that used to be at the school but were picked up by another bad man. She said he comes from the south to pick up the girls who don't behave. I told Lincoln about the man who was listed as Charlie's next of kin that Todd mentioned last week. Lincoln pulled up the man's information and found his photo. He showed the photo to Lucy. She cried, but confirmed it was him. His name is Arnold, redacted, and he even looked like a creep. He should have made it into town by now, according to my conversation with Todd. Lincoln had his doubts that he would show at all, but said they would keep trying to reach him until he is caught. Later, when the IT department went through the computer in Charlie's office and they validated what Lucy said, they found hundreds of messages between Charlie and Arnold that revealed a bigger trafficking ring led by Arnold. At that point, they turned the case over to the FBI for a large-scale operation. That was the last of Officer Lincoln's questioning. Then the on-site nurse gave Lucy a quick evaluation. Lucy said she felt fine, so the nurse told her to get plenty of rest over the next few days and drink plenty of water. Lucy asked about the other girls in the school. The nurse said they are all going to be okay, and that the officers are reaching out to their parents now. Finally, Lincoln said, "We are free to leave, but we have to stay in town until the investigation is complete." I extended an offer to Josh and Lucy to stay at my place for a few days which they accepted. We left the department grateful for all they have done, but hopeful we wouldn't have to return anytime soon. We arrived at my apartment before noon. Before I could even offer my bedroom to Lucy, she was asleep on the couch. Josh fell asleep on the recliner adjacent to her, unwilling to leave her side. I left 2 glasses of water on the coffee table with a note telling them to help themselves to anything in the kitchen. I walked into my bedroom and turned on my computer. Officer Lincoln told me to delete the video of the school for the remainder of the investigation. I wasn't sure how long that would be, so I began writing my experiences here, while the memories and emotions are still fresh. Surprisingly, my YouTube channel no longer feels as important. I have new friends to care for now, along with my old ones. Maybe a break from ghost hunting will do me good, because I certainly found more than I was hoping to. So that's all for now. Dubious ghost viewers, until next time, thank you. You survived, for now, but the shadows aren't done with you yet. If this story gave you chills like the video, share it with someone who dares to watch and comment your thoughts, especially if you're watching in the dark. Subscribe to Spectral Shadows, where fear never sleeps, and the next nightmare is always waiting. We'll be watching.